Good afternoon, commissioners, and good afternoon all. Welcome to the New York City Planning Commission Review Session of Tuesday, February 16, 2021. The time is 1 p.m. and a quorum is present. Our first item on our agenda is a certification of a site selection and acquisition in Brooklyn Community District 18. Our presenter is Catherine Richards.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Excuse my funky background. So this is an application by the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene in conjunction with the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, or DCAS, seeking a site selection and acquisition at 1427 Ralph Avenue. Next slide, please. The project site, 1427 Ralph Avenue, is located in the neighborhood of Canarsie in Brooklyn's Community District 18. The proposed actions would facilitate the operation of a pest control and vector control program in an as-of-right one-story warehouse building that is currently under construction. The proposed project would provide DOHMH with a facility that fulfills the need for storage of supplies, pesticides, and safety equipment, as well as consolidating pest control and vector control operations in one location. Next slide, please. DOHMH is responsible for enforcing New York City's Health Code Article 151, which addresses control of vectors of human diseases such as rodents, insects, and pests. The Bureau of Veterinary and Pest Control Services and the Office of Vector Surveillance and Control carry out many jobs related to Article 151, including ensuring an environment free from animal-borne disease hazards, inspecting public and private city properties for pests, and monitoring and controlling human disease vectors. The proposed project would allow DOHMH to enforce the provisions of New York City Health Code Article 151 and other statutory mandates that require a space that can facilitate the pest control and vector control programs. Next slide, please. The existing DOHMH vector control facility is located at 1075 Ralph Avenue in Canarsie, Community District 18 in Brooklyn. The facility is approximately 3,400 square feet, which is not enough space for both the pest control and vector control programs. Currently, there is no dedicated space for DOHMH's pest control program. Previously, this facility was located at 520 Kingsland Avenue in Greenpoint, Community District 1 in Brooklyn. The lease for this 7,000 square foot space expired in 2018, and the pest control program has since been redistributed to multiple other DOHMH facilities. The 2021-2022 citywide statement of needs included a request for the relocation of a combined facility for vector and pest control services. The location was not specified, but the request was for a facility of approximately 36,000 square feet to accommodate 34 staff members with 51 parking spaces. Next slide, please. Here outlined in solid red is the proposed project area. The surrounding area contains primarily industrial, manufacturing, transportation, and utility uses, as well as some parking facilities, commercial and office buildings, and public facilities. Low-density residential uses are also located north and south of the project area. The surrounding area includes the Flatlands Fairfield Industrial Business Zone, which generally extends from Ditmas Avenue to the north to just south of Foster Avenue to the south. The project area is within this IBZ. Public transit in the surrounding area includes the Canarsie Rockaway Parkway L station, about a mile from the project area, and the B47 bus line, which runs along Ralph Avenue. Next slide, please. The project area is northwest of the 2009 Canarsie rezoning area. This rezoning rezoned all or portions of 250 blocks to lower density and contextual zoning districts, including R31, R3X, R4A, R41, R5B, and R5D. The immediate surrounding area, including the project area, is zoned M11. M1 districts allow most industrial uses if they meet certain performance standards. Commercial uses and some community facilities are also permitted. M11 districts have a maximum FAR of 1.0 and typically require 1 parking space per 300 square feet. Next slide, please. DOHMH would occupy approximately 36,000 square feet of the warehouse building's 48,000 square feet, as well as the entirety of the 19,800 square foot parking lot. The building is being constructed independently of DOHMH and the proposed city actions. The facility would be used as a central distribution warehouse for all 5 boroughs and as a field office for South Brooklyn and Staten Island's pest control and vector control programs. And as I mentioned earlier, this facility would accommodate both field and office operations and in the same location. Next slide, please. The building is anticipated to contain staff offices and locker rooms, storage space for pest control and vector control equipment, dry pesticide storage and chemical storage space, an insect lab for rearing and testing mosquitoes for pesticide resistance studies, space for spray operations, including a mosquito spray truck washing bay and loading dock, and outdoor parking for DOHMH spray trucks, vans, and passenger cars. All of these intended uses are permitted under the current M11 zoning. The site would allow DOHMH to centralize its pest control, vector control, lab, office, and storage space into one facility. DOHMH expects 34 employees to work in this facility Monday through Friday from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. and 10 employees on weekends from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. During vector spray season, which is June to September, they expect 20 employees to work out of the facility 24 hours a day from Monday to Friday. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, DOHMH is seeking a site selection and acquisition at 1427 Ralph Avenue to facilitate the operation of a new pest control and vector control program facility. That's the presentation, and I can now answer any questions.
Thank you, Catherine. Questions from the commission? Commissioner Cerullo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question about the square footage. What is the balance of the, like, say, the 12,000 square feet that they're not using going to be used for?
That would be another tenant. When this was submitted, DOHMH didn't know who that would be, who would be occupying the rest of the building.
Okay, so but it'll be a separate space that's being constructed in a way that's separate from the city's space, or could be another city agency perhaps, but at least it's not part of.
It's not intermixed with the
MH. Okay, got it. And one other question, I know that in the, I guess in the backup materials, it said that the parking would not be used by any of the staff of the facility. So this is all for the equipment and the vehicles that are part of the operation of the vector control and the pest control. So let me ask you this: based on the hours of operation, are the trucks and the vehicles, whatever they might be, coming in and out during those times? Like what is the usage of the facility with respect to the traffic that's coming in and out of the facility, and how has that been looked at in this process, if at all?
Sure. I don't know exactly what hours different vehicles would be coming and going from the facility, but I can ask DOHMH to address that at the public hearing. But one thing they did point out is that this sort of having operations centralized in one place would allow them to be more effective at deploying vehicles and managing the routes of different trucks, cars that they're sending out.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Levin.
Thank you, Katie. The briefing sheet indicates that the terms of acquisition are to be determined. And the briefing materials sort of imply in one place that it's for purchase and another place that it's for lease. When they come back for the public hearing, maybe be interesting to know whether this is a lease or a purchase, and if it's a lease, for how long, what the term of the lease is.
Sure. I believe they are intending to lease. I don't know for what length of time, but I can ask them to address that more.
We'll listen on that when they come back for the hearing. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Commissioner Rumpershaw.
Yeah, I'm just curious, are they servicing the vehicles within the structure as well?
I'm not sure about that, but I can ask and have them mention that at the public hearing. And there is a site plan of how they are intending to lay the space out.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Then the application is certified.
Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.
Second item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of a zoning map amendment and special permit in Brooklyn Community District 1. Our presenter is Alexandra Patty Diaz.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a private application on behalf of RP Intel LLC to facilitate the redevelopment of an AGME smoke fish facility in Greenpoint Community District 1, Brooklyn. Next. The applicant is seeking a zoning map amendment to rezone the site from an M31 zoning district to an M15 district and a large-scale general development special permit. The proposed development would include approximately 480,000 square feet of office and retail space and approximately 95,000 square feet of a new AGME small fish facility to replace the existing facility at 30 James Street in Greenpoint Community District 1, Brooklyn. Next. Founded in 1905, AGME Smokefish is a fourth-generation Brooklyn business that first opened at 30 James Street in 1954. Next. AGME has grown its Greenpoint facility from a 10,000 square feet building to its current size of approximately 73,000. In 1975, AGME expanded north to an adjacent building at 14 Mesero Avenue, previously occupied by Williamsburg Steel. In 1994, AGME expanded again to the south at 192 Banker Street, formerly occupied by Devon Lithographers, and further to 190 Banker Street in 2003. The current facility contains fish processing and production space, distribution, and administrative office. There are approximately 170 employees working there today. However, the existing facility faces a number of challenges. Advances in food safety require upgrades to the facility, and the level of investment required to upgrade the existing building will be cost prohibitive. The proposed solution is to construct a new purpose-built facility on the portion of the site not currently occupied by AGME today, while keeping its current plant operational, allowing AGME the opportunity to remain in Greenpoint. Next. AGME is situated in Greenpoint, Williamsburg, IBC, and it is in close proximity to the residential neighborhoods of Williamsburg and Greenpoint. The surrounding area is characterized by a variety of industrial, commercial, and residential land uses and various building types. The area is immediately surrounded. The development site is characterized by 1- and 2-story brick buildings and contains various industrial uses, such as fabricators, contractor supply stores, and food processing facilities. This area was within the 2005 Greenpoint Williamsburg rezoning, which rezoned heavy industrial districts to light industrial, residential, and special mixed-use districts to facilitate the development of thousands of new housing units. The AGME facility abutted, but was not included within the rezoning area. At that time, upon the request of AGME, the heavy M31 zoning district was maintained to support the continuation of its operations and proposed expansion. Today, the surrounding area is predominantly zoned M31, M11, and M12, and there's a special mixed-use district and an R6B district in the periphery of the area. Next. The project area is within the Greenpoint Williamsburg IBC and is close proximity to the industrial business incentive area within the IBC. Next. The project area comprises the entirety of Block 2615, bounded by James Street to the west, on Mesero Avenue to the north, Banker Street to the east, and West Avenue and North 15th Street to the south. Next. These are images of the warehouse for the stone supplier on lot 6. Next. These are images of the portion of lot 6 and portion of AGME frontage on Banker Street. Next. These are images of lot 125, the open storage of the construction company. Next. These are images of various AGME buildings. Next. AGME is looking to expand and modernize on Block 2615. The proposed large-scale general development will contain a new AGME facility and a new commercial building, totally approximately 583,000 square feet of zoning floor area equal to 5 FIR and approximately 21,000 square feet of open space, 150 parking spaces and 65 biking parking spaces. Next. In order to maintain the continued operations, the new custom-built AGME facility will be constructed in Lot 6, the northern east corner of the block, while the current AGME facility will continue to operate in Lots 1, 21, 25, and 50. Next. Once the AGME facility is completed, it will move its operations to the new facility with minimal disruption. Only after AGME is operating in the new facility, the applicant will begin demolition and construction on the remaining portion of the development site. Next. The AGME facility will occupy the northern east portion of the site with an entrance on Banker Street and loading berth on both Banker Street and Mesero Avenue. The rest of the ground floor is activated with retail uses on Banker Street, West Avenue, Gem Street, and Mesero Avenue, and the office lobby will be on Gem Street. Entrance to the parking garage is also on Gem Street, and loading for the commercial uses is on Banker Street. A significant PAA that breaks up the irregular long block by creating connections throughout the site is located towards Banker Street and West Avenue. Next. The overall development will consist of a 4-story AGME facility on the northern east corner of the site and a commercial building that ranges from 2-story along Banker Street and West Avenue to 5 stories on Mesero and Gem, and reaches an ultimate height of 9 stories at the center of the site. Next. The commercial building will cantilever over the portion of AGME building. The remaining portion of the AGME building must remain unobstructed for ventilation purposes. The proposed facility will provide a more efficient and state-of-the-art industrial space for AGME. The raw materials will be delivered through 2 loading berths on Mesero Avenue. The administrative office and employee wellness areas will be located on the 4th floor of the facility. The proposed commercial building will contain office and ground floor retail spaces, will occupy the remainder of the block. The 9-story commercial portion of the proposed development will have a maximum building height of approximately 178 feet. And it will have approximately 480,000 square feet of total commercial floor area, of which the office space will occupy approximately 450,000 square feet. And on the ground floor, the retail uses will occupy approximately 33,000 square feet. Next. Approximately 150 off-street accessory parking spaces will be provided on the ground level with access from Gem Street. It is anticipated that the parking garage will be used by AGME employees, office tenants and visitors, and retail and restaurateur patrons. The office retail portion of the proposed development will have 3 loading berths, which will be located on Banker Street. The building will also provide 65 accessory parking spaces. The proposed development will feature terraces on the roof of the building and on the setbacks, provided at varying roof heights. Next. The proposed development will provide a total of approximately 21,000 square feet of public access area, PAA, of which approximately 12,000 square feet will be open to the sky and approximately 8,500 square feet partially covered. Additionally, separated from the PAA, there is approximately 57 square feet of open area adjacent to the retail establishments of the development site. Next. This is an image of the pedestrian pathway throughout the building, which will help to break up the large irregular block, bringing pedestrians from the G train station to the east throughout the site and to the waterfront. The corridor will be well lit and include bright treatments on the ceiling on the passageway. I can add that the plaza at Wythe Avenue is a prominent intersection in the IBZ, where the street grids of Greenpoint and Williamsburg intersect. The Upland Plaza will bring more light and air into the block and offers planted seating areas for future employees, visitors, and residents. That is a view of the plaza from Wythe Avenue. Next. And this is a view from the pedestrian corridor. Next. Thank you. In order to facilitate this development, the applicant proposes the following actions. A zoning map amendment to rezone the development site from an N31 district to an N15 district, and a large-scale general development special permit pursuant to CR section 74-74-382 to allow the proposed development to penetrate the required sky exposure plane and the required initial setback distance, contrary to CR 43-43. Next. The applicant is proposing to rezone the project area from an N31 zoning district, a heavy industrial district, to an N15 zoning district, a light industrial district. Next. The applicant is also seeking a special permit pursuant to CR 74-74-382 to modify the required height and setback regulations through a large-scale general development plan. The large-scale general plan special permits offer flexibility to allow the development of a state-of-the-art fish processing facility, flexible office space floor plates, and a large public access area on the development site. The specific waivers being requested are height and setback. Under the proposed N15 zoning district, CR 43-43 requires that a front wall be set back 20 feet from a narrow street above the height of 85 feet or 6 stories, whichever is less. The commercial component of the proposed development along James Street and Mr. Avenue will rise on the lot line to a height of approximately 104 feet before providing the setback. The second waiver is for the sky exposure plane. Under the proposed N15 zoning district, the CR 43-43 requires that a development stay below a sky exposure plane of 2.7 vertical feet to 1 horizontal foot, extending from the maximum front wall height of 85 feet. The commercial component of the proposed development will penetrate the required sky exposure plane on the James Street and Mesero Avenue sides of the building. Next. These are waiver diagrams highlighting the requested setback and the sky exposure plane modifications along Mesero Avenue and James Street. Next. These waivers diagrams highlight the requested setbacks and exposure planes modifications along Mesero Avenue, the commercial building, and how it penetrates along James Street. Next. And next. An EIS was conducted by DCP acting on behalf of the CPC as lead agency. The notice of completion for the DEIS was issued on October 30th, 2020. The DEIS identifies significant adverse impacts related to transportation and construction. Possible mitigation measures are identified in the DEIS and will be explored further between the DEIS and the FEIS. Next. The project was certified in November 2nd of 2020. The Community Board 1 held a hearing in December 7th of 2020 and recommended to approve the application with modifications. Next. The modifications are to secure manufacturing uses on the site by either a deed to restrict the industrial use on the AGME fish building or for the applicant to apply for the IDA program. AGME fish building to be a state-of-the-art emission control system, to not have bar or amplified music on the roofs, for the applicant to partner with DPR to contribute on the maintenance of Bushwick Inlet Park, for the applicant to continue communication with Community Board regarding construction schedule and conditions, for the applicant to comply with both local law 15 and 97, and for the applicant to provide in the building stormwater and waste management that will net zero into the city system. Next. The Brooklyn Borough President held a hearing in December 2020, and we haven't received his recommendations yet. And tomorrow, it's scheduled for the public hearing. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Alexandra. Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Alejandra, for your presentation. I can ask this of the applicant tomorrow, but I'm just wondering, do you have any insight into the kinds of retail that are contemplated? 33,000 square feet of retail is not an insubstantial amount in this environment on a spec basis. So do you know what kind of retail that they're thinking about there?
I don't. The applicant will have to provide details if they have tomorrow.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, Alexandra, thank you for the presentation. The 65 bike spaces, that's the minimum required by zoning?
I don't have that answer. My apologies.
Okay, so thank you. I would be interested in knowing that, and you know, just some quick calculations that I would like the applicant to address. You know, there's 454,000 square feet of office projected at about 300, you know, square feet per person. That's 1,500 employees. 65 spaces is really insufficient. And given what we've seen more recently in terms of the kind of modes of transportation that we need to be able to accommodate, you know, that's really 4% of employees, giving them the opportunity for bike spaces doesn't seem sufficient in this day and age. And so, you know, I recognize it's probably because that's what zoning requires, but, you know, they may want to think about that. And I would think we would want to encourage that. So thank you.
Other questions? Okay, we will then see this tomorrow at our public hearing.
Third item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of a UDAP designation, project approval, and disposition of city-owned property in Brooklyn Community District 5. Our presenter is Lilia Carrier.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. We can go to the next slide, please. This is an application by the Department of Housing Preservation and Development for a UDAP designation, project approval, and disposition of 3 city-owned lots to facilitate the construction of 3 new buildings of approximately 46 affordable rental units, 8 of which will be dedicated to the Affordable Independent Residence for Seniors program, or AIRS. Next slide, please. The proposed development is located in East New York in Community District 5 in Brooklyn. Next slide, please. The project includes 3 development sites. Development Site 1 is located at 306 Pennsylvania Avenue between Belmont and Sutter Avenues. Development Site 2 is located at 392 Wyona Street between Sutter and Blake Avenues. And development site 3 is located at 467 Vermont Street and 426 Wyona Street between Blake and Dumont Avenues. Sutter Avenue and Blake Avenue serve as neighborhood retail corridors. Surrounding land uses include schools, house of worship, and open space. The area is well served by transit. The Pennsylvania Avenue 3 subway station, the Van Siclen Avenue C subway station are both within walking distance of all development sites, and the Sutter Avenue L station is within walking distance of development site 1. Local bus services within the area include the B20, the B83, which travel along Pennsylvania Avenue, and the B14, which travels along Sutter Avenue. Next slide, please. Development site 1 is located in an R6 zoning district. So the surrounding land uses include a mix of residential, commercial, community facility, and manufacturing uses. The surrounding residential development consists primarily of low-density 2-family homes, mid-density multifamily buildings with heights ranging from 3 to 7 stories. Next slide, please. Development site 1, located at 306 Pennsylvania Avenue, is on the west side of Pennsylvania Avenue between Belmont Avenue and Sutter Avenue. Next slide, please. The site consists of a vacant mid-block city-owned tax lot of approximately 5,000 square feet with a 50-foot frontage along Pennsylvania Avenue. Next slide, please. The development site will be a 7-story elevator building with 25 affordable rental dwelling units, 8 of which will be dedicated to the AIRS program. The unit mix will be 6 studios, 12 one-bedrooms, 8 two-bedrooms, with approximately 14,400 square feet of residential floor area and 4,300 square feet of the residential floor area under the AIRS program. The development will have an FAR of 3.7 and a building height of 65 feet. Next slide, please. The front of the building will be set back to align with the adjacent buildings. There will also be a landscape rear front yard that will buffer between the ground floor residential units and the street. The proposed building will include a landscape rear yard, bicycle parking spaces in the cellar, and a common laundry room on the first floor. Next slide, please. Development site 2 is also located within an R6 zoning district with similar land uses surrounding the development site. Next slide, please. Development site 2 is located at 392 Wyona Street on the west side of Wyona between Sutter Avenue and Blake Avenue. Next slide, please. The site consists of a vacant mid-block city-owned tax lot of approximately 4,000 square feet with a 40-foot frontage along Wyona Street. Next slide, please. The 392 Wyona Street development will be a 4-story building with 11 affordable rental dwelling units. The unit mix will be 3 studios, 5 one-bedrooms, and 3 3-bedrooms with approximately 8,200 square feet of residential floor area. Development will have an FAR of 2.16 and a building height of 42 feet. Next slide, please. The front of the building will be set back to align with adjacent buildings and to accommodate an access ramp. The landscaping at the front will buffer between the ground floor residential unit and the street. The ground floor will be raised above ground level to provide more privacy to the ground floor unit. The development will also include a landscape rear yard, bicycle parking, and a common laundry room on the first floor. Next slide, please. Development site 3 is located in an R6 zoning district with a C23 commercial overlay. Again, similar surrounding land uses. Next slide, please. Development site 3 is located at 467 Vermont Street and 426 Wyona Street on Blake Avenue between Wyona and Vermont Streets. Next slide, please. The development site consists of a vacant corner city-owned tax lot of approximately 4,000 square feet with a 200-foot frontage along Blake Avenue and 20-foot frontages along Wyona and Vermont Streets. Next slide, please. The development site will be one building with 2 wings and 10 affordable rental units. There will also be a common open entrance yard along Blake Avenue and a common cellar for building services. Next slide, please. Wing A on the left will front Wyona Street. It will be 3 stories and 32 feet tall. Wing B on the right will front Vermont Street and will be 4 stories and 42 feet tall. The development will have an FAR of 2.13. The unit mix will be 3 studios, 3 1-bedrooms, 2 2-bedrooms, and 2 3-bedrooms with approximately 8,500 square feet of residential floor area. Bicycle parking will be provided on the ground floor. Next slide, please. So both front yards will be set back to align with adjacent buildings. Ground floor on both wings will be raised to provide privacy to the ground floor units and to accommodate an access ramp. Bicycle parking will also be provided on the first floor. Next slide, please. On January 27th, Community Board 5 voted to approve with conditions. They voted 24 in favor, none against, and 2 abstaining. Community Board 5 requested that the applicant team fully consider the economic impacts of COVID-19 and the potential decrease in annual income to CD5 residents. They also requested an adjustment in the number and types of units at the various AMI levels to provide opportunities for WMB companies based in East New York to hire a minimum of 40% of the workforce from East New York, to partner with community-based organizations to facilitate the hiring, and to provide a fair wage. Next slide, please. The Borough President's public hearing was held on January 25th and voted to approve with the following recommendations. Recommendations include for HPD to incorporate the site into a land disposition agreement or regulatory agreement for the developer's commitment to retaining residential units as permanently affordable, targeting eligible seniors, including those formerly homeless, for studio and 1-bedroom units with rents based at 30, 40, and 50% of AMI, retain locally affordable housing nonprofits to serve and administer as administering agent to promote affordable housing lottery readiness, and for the developer to commit to working with DEP, DOT, and NYC Parks to implement curb extensions, protected painted areas, and DOT maintenance agreements, as well as installing rain gardens. And that concludes our presentation.
Thanks, Lilia. Questions from the commission? Not seeing any. We will see this matter at a public hearing tomorrow.
Fourth item on the agenda is a pre-hearing review of a zoning map and zoning text amendment in Brooklyn Community District 4. Our presenter is Saree Black.
Good afternoon, commissioners. This is an application by Sidam Inc. and 3210 Willoughby LLC for a series of land use actions. Next slide, please. The actions include a zoning map amendment from M11 to R7D M15, M15, and R6, a zoning text amendment to establish a mandatory inclusionary housing area, a zoning text amendment to establish a special mixed-use district, and a special permit to reduce parking to facilitate affordable housing. The actions will facilitate the development of a 9-story, approximately 82,000 square foot residential building with 95 affordable dwelling units at 1250 Willoughby Avenue, and an approximately 14,000 square foot enlargement of an existing 4-story industrial building at 349 Sidam Street. Next slide, please. The project area is located in Northwest Bushwick in Brooklyn Community District 4, close to the borders of Brooklyn Community District 1, Greenpoint Williamsburg to the west, and Queens Community District 5, Ridgewood Maspeth to the north. Next slide, please. The project area is at the intersection of industrial and residential areas and is surrounded by a mix of residential, commercial, industrial, and community facility uses. The area to the north and west of the site is an industrial area typified by 1-story warehouses with light industrial and commercial uses and non-conforming 3-story multifamily buildings. The area to the south and east of the site consists of 2- to 3-story row houses and multifamily buildings. Retail is concentrated along Wyckoff Avenue, an active commercial corridor just north of the site, characterized by 3-story multifamily buildings with ground floor retail, 1-story converted warehouses, and 4-story converted loft buildings. Next slide, please. The project area is located at the eastern edge of a large M11 district that extends west into East Williamsburg and north into Maspeth, Queens. The project area also abuts an R6 zoning district that covers the majority of the Bushwick neighborhood. Nearby public facilities include PS 123, the elementary school abutting the project area to the south, Maria Hernandez Park, a 7-acre park located 1 block southwest of the project area, and Wyckoff Heights Medical Center, 4 blocks east of the project area. The project area is well served by public transportation, including the L train, which runs along Wyckoff Avenue with subway stations within 2 blocks of the project area in either direction. The project area is also served by the B13, B38, and B57 bus routes. Next slide, please. The proposed project area is located mid-block on block 3210, bounded by Willoughby Avenue to the west, Saddam Street to the east, Wyckoff Avenue to the north, and Irving Avenue to the south. The proposed project area consists of lots 15 to 21, 48, 51, and part of lot 1 on block 3210. Next slide, please. In the top images, you can see the Saddam Street frontage, including lot 51, a 17,500 square foot lot improved with a light manufacturing loft building occupied by tenants that include furniture manufacturers and artists. In the bottom images, you can see the lots on the Willoughby Avenue frontage. Next slide, please. The project area consists of 2 contiguous development sites located mid-block on block 3210 on a 32,500 square foot zoning lot. The 2 development sites are commonly owned but will be developed separately. The Willoughby development site is approximately 15,000 square feet and is vacant and used for parking and storage. The Saddam manufacturing enlargement site is approximately 17,500 square feet and is improved with a 2-story, 2- and 4-story, 43,000 square foot light manufacturing building. Next slide, please. The proposed actions would facilitate the development of a new affordable residential building on the Willoughby development site and the enlargement of the existing industrial building at the Saddam manufacturing enlargement site. Next slide, please. The proposed Willoughby development site is a new 9-story residential building at 1250 Willoughby Avenue that would contain approximately 82,000 square feet of residential floor area with an FAR of 5.5. The proposed building has a height of 90 feet. The building would contain approximately 95 affordable dwelling units developed under HPD's Mixed Middle Income or M² program, which funds the construction of new rental housing affordable to low, moderate, and middle income families. The applicants have selected MIH option 1 for the proposed development, which requires affordable housing to be provided equivalent to 25% of the residential floor area, developed at an average of 60% area median income with 10% at 40% area median income. Next slide, please. The proposed manufacturing enlargement site would enlarge the 3rd and 4th floors and add a new 5th floor to the existing manufacturing building at 349 Saddam Street. The proposed enlargement would add approximately 14,000 square feet of additional floor area, increasing the building's total floor area from 43,000 square feet to 56,000 square feet with an FAR of 3.23. The building height would increase from 59 feet to 67 feet. The proposed enlargement would permit the applicants to preserve existing uses in the building and increase the building's viability with additional light industrial space. While the applicants have not yet marketed the space to potential tenants, they anticipate that the proposed tenants in the enlargement would be similar to the existing tenants, such as upholsterers and local artisans. Next slide, please. The actions necessary to facilitate the project include a zoning map amendment from M11 to R70 M15, M15, and R6, a zoning text amendment to establish a mandatory inclusionary housing area, a zoning text amendment to establish a special mixed-use district, and a special permit to reduce parking to facilitate affordable housing. Next slide, please. The applicants propose a zoning map amendment to rezone the project area from an M11 zoning district to an R70 M15 zoning district, or MX21, an M15 district, and an R6 zoning district. The proposed R70 M15 zoning district would be mapped along the Willoughby Avenue frontage. The applicant proposes to amend section 12390 of the zoning resolution to establish a special mixed-use district, MX21. MX districts permit a wide variety of uses, including residential, commercial, and/or manufacturing uses, and R7D districts permit residential development at a maximum FAR of 5.6 for developments with permanent affordable housing under the MIH program. R7D zoning districts permit a maximum base height of 95 feet with a maximum building height of 110 or 115 feet with a qualifying ground floor. Off-street parking is required for 50% of the building's dwelling units. The proposed M15 zoning district would be mapped along the Saddam Street frontage. M15 is a moderate density light manufacturing district that allows 5 FAR of industrial and commercial uses and 6.5 FAR of community facility uses. The maximum base height in M15 districts is 85 feet or 6 stories, whichever is less, and the maximum building height is subject to a sky exposure plane. Parking is not required in M15 districts. The increase in density would permit the 14,000 square foot expansion of the manufacturing site to the proposed 3.23 FAR with a height of 67 feet. The proposed R6 district would be mapped to a depth of 25 feet into Lot 1, which would remove the existing split lot condition on Lot 1 and bring the community facility use into conformance. The proposed zoning map amendment from an M11 district to an R7D M15, M15, and R6 districts would be consistent with the surrounding mixed-use context and would further area-wide planning goals of promoting mixed-use development with affordable housing and job growth on suitable properties near transit. Next slide, please. The applicants propose to map the project area as mandatory inclusionary housing area 2 on map 2 for Brooklyn Community District 4 in Appendix F of the zoning resolution. Pursuant to the MIH program, the applicants have selected MIH option 1, for which affordable housing must be provided equivalent to 25% of the residential floor area at an average of 60% of area median income, with 10% at 40% area median income. Next slide, please. The proposed special permit to reduce parking to facilitate affordable housing within the transit zone, pursuant to zoning resolution section 74-533, is necessary to waive the residential parking requirement of 36 accessory off-street spaces for the approximately 72 non-income restricted units above 80% of the area median income at the proposed Willoughby development site. The findings for the special permit include that the parking waiver will facilitate a development with at least 20% income restricted units as determined in consultation with HPD, will not cause traffic congestion, and will not have undue adverse effects on residents, businesses, and community facilities in the surrounding area, including the availability of parking spaces for such uses. Next slide, please. In a meeting on December 16th, by a vote of 32 in favor, 0 opposed, and 0 abstaining, Community Board 4 approved the project with conditions related to affordable housing provision, job creation, and outreach. Related to housing, the Community Board requests that the applicant secure HPD funding, increase the percentage of units in the 30 to 40% area median income range, include community preference for affordable housing, and commit to maintaining the site as existing conditions if HPD funding is not secured. Related to economic development, the Community Board requests that the manufacturing zones be memorialized by a restrictive declaration or another mechanism outside of zoning. The Community Board would also request that the applicants partner with workforce development organizations on job readiness and local hiring. Lastly, regarding outreach, the Community Board requests that the applicants do robust outreach for new affordable housing and hiring opportunities to be generated by this project and continue to be an informative partner throughout the development process. Next slide, please. On December 21st, the Borough President held a hearing on the proposed actions. In a resolution submitted to DCP on February 11th, the Borough President approved the project with 2 conditions. The first is that a legally enforceable mechanism, such as a deed restriction, contract with a nonprofit business service provider, and/or government financing agreement, be established to ensure that the maker use enlargement is achieved in a timely manner. Uses are restricted to innovation and maker space, and floor area compliance is monitored. The second condition is that a legally enforceable mechanism, such as the New York City zoning resolution, a deed restriction, contract with a nonprofit housing ambassador, and/or government financing agreement, be established to realize 100% affordable housing, MIH option 3, a greater percentage of affordable housing to households at 60% area median income, as well as a series of other recommendations related to bedroom mix, outreach to seniors, sustainability and resiliency measures, and hiring of local and minority and women-owned business enterprises. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you. I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Suri. Questions from the commission? Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, I don't so much have a question as a request of the applicant on at the hearing tomorrow. Since the expansion of the, let's call it the maker space building, is such an important piece of this, as the borough president's recommendation made clear. I think the community seems to be open to a significant increase in density on the housing site in order to subsidize the makerspace site. Oh, I'm sorry about my ringing phone. I'd be interested in hearing from them a little bit more about the vision for the basis for the expansion. Is that really an excuse for being able to get the permission for that housing that they're proposing, or there's real conviction behind the expansion of the industrial space? That's the end of my question.
Okay, I can definitely relay to them that we'd like to hear more from them about the vision.
Commissioner Burney.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to understand with the existing building, in the rendering, it looks as though it's been refinished in some way or reclad. It doesn't look the same as the original. Do you know if that's what's happening, or are they, maybe on Wednesday they can explain exactly how they're handling?
Yeah, you know, refinishing of the facade has not been under discussion. It really, the focus of the zoning conversations have really, and the land use actions really have been on the expansion. So that's something that we can ask them.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yeah, I'm having a problem with the raise hand function, so we did it the old way. So just if they could speak, if the applicant could speak tomorrow to their memorialization of their commitments as the borough president and community board both brought up in their comments.
We'll relay that.
Thank you. Other questions? Then we'll see this tomorrow at our public hearing.
Great, thank you.
Fifth item on the agenda is a pre-hearing review of the zoning text amendment in Brooklyn Community District 2. Our presenter is Amritha Mahesh.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Next slide, please. This is a private application requesting a zoning text amendment to modify ZR section 101-11 special ground floor use regulations within the special downtown Brooklyn district. This action would modify the ground floor use requirements to allow all non-residential uses permitted by the underlying zoning district at an existing building located at 86 Fleet Place. Next slide, please. The project site is located in the downtown Brooklyn neighborhood of Community District 2 in Brooklyn. Next slide. The site is located just east of Flatbush Avenue extension along Myrtle Avenue between Fleet Place and a demapped portion of Prince Street, and is improved with a 32-story, approximately 394,000 square foot mixed-use building, substantially completed in 2017. Next slide, please. The project site is located within the special downtown Brooklyn district. It is mapped with a C64 zoning district and is subject to the special ground floor use regulations, which require retail continuity at certain locations, including Myrtle Avenue. The retail continuity requirements are intended to ensure an active and vibrant streetscape. Next slide. Here are some images of the project site and surrounding areas looking south and west along Myrtle Avenue. Next slide. To the left is an image of the project's ground floor condition along Myrtle Avenue looking east, and to the right is an image along Fleet Place looking south. Next slide. And here are some additional images of the surrounding area along Myrtle Avenue. Next slide, please. The applicant has stated that they have explored multiple pathways to identify tenants to occupy the ground floor space since 2016, However, the space has never been filled since its completion. According to the applicant, proximity to Fort Greene Park and several large Tower in the Park residential developments makes the project area more residential in character, in contrast to areas more centrally located within the special district, and therefore better suited for a broader range of uses, including neighborhood service establishments and community facility uses. The applicant has identified potential tenants, including a daycare facility and a medical facility, which they believe would benefit the surrounding community by providing much needed services. Next slide, please. The proposed action would allow the applicant to rent the space to community facility uses, as well as all other non-residential uses permitted in the underlying C64 district, including but not limited to treatment healthcare facilities, schools, non-commercial clubs, and wholesale establishments. Next slide. The proposed action would replace the retail continuity requirement with a non-residential requirement along the portion of Myrtle Avenue between Fleet Place and the prolongation of Prince Street. Next slide. This application was referred to Brooklyn Community Board 2 on December 14th. The Community Board held a public hearing on December 16th and voted to approve the application on January 13th. 32 in favor, none against, and no abstentions. Next slide, please. This application was also referred to the Brooklyn Borough President on December 14th. The Borough President held a public hearing on January 25th and voted to approve the application with recommendations. In consultation with Brooklyn Community Board 2 and local elected officials, the applicant should engage residents of the NYCHA Ingersoll and Walt Whitman houses to determine appropriate community facilities for the ground floor space. The Department of Education should study the extent of unmet need for subsidized childcare in Community District 2, particularly in the areas adjacent to NYCHA developments. And the applicant should actively solicit arts or cultural organizations for ground floor occupancy based on reasonable lease terms. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. Thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Amisha. Questions? Commissioner Levin.
Not so much a question, but an observation, which is that in the previous the previous application for the adjacent block made exactly the same pitch to us about how they'd like to fill the space with the daycare center or medical offices, and we ended up with a CVS and medical offices, which is not exactly what was intended. They're telling us the same thing here. I find myself very sympathetic to the conditions or observations that in the Borough President's recommendation that they redouble their efforts to find a use for this new space that is consistent with what they've told us they're seeking.
Mm-hmm. We can definitely relay that comment to the applicant, but the applicant has noted that one of the buildings, 180 Myrtle Avenue, which was part of the 2018 application, is now tenanted with a daycare by Brooklyn Community Services, providing affordable daycare services.
But reaching out in the way the Borough President suggests should yield a similarly good result here.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Burney.
Well, except if there's already a daycare center in the other building, it reduces the chances of getting one here, doesn't it? So I don't know. Amrita, could you tell us what efforts the applicant made to rent the space to retail and how much rent they were demanding and how that compared with rents in the neighborhood in general?
I can speak to some of the efforts that they made. They can elaborate on the rents that they've been asking for. They've worked with the local bid. They've held open houses. They've noted that they've worked with commercial brokers ever since the building was constructed in 2016 as well. They've also hosted property tours, but the applicant can elaborate on some of these efforts over the years at the public hearing tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Not seeing other hands, we will see this again tomorrow at the public hearing.
Thank you.
Sixth item is a pre-hearing review of a zoning map amendment in Brooklyn Community District 1. Alexandra is back to present this item.
Good afternoon, commissioners. This is an application by Don Kiernan and NRLURF LLC for a zoning map amendment to facilitate the development of a new 5-story mixed-use building in Brooklyn. Next. The applicant is requesting a zoning map amendment to establish a C14 commercial overlay within an existing R6A and R6B districts. Next. The project area is in the Williamsburg neighborhood of Brooklyn, Community District 1. Next. And the project area is composed of 11 contiguous tax lots on block 2305, consisting of lots from 1 to 10 and a portion of lot 34. Next. This project area is located on the east side of Bedford Avenue between North 9 and North 10th Street in Williamsburg, and it is well served by public transit and in close proximity to McCarran Park. Next. The existing zoning districts in the area include a mix of residential, commercial, and manufacturing designations, including R6A, R6B, C14, and an MX district. The area is within the inclusionary housing designated area. The existing land uses are primarily a mix of multifamily residential and commercial uses. Next. The development site sits in the mid-block portion of the lot. It is currently improved with two two-stories building containing 3 dwelling units. Next. Towards the south corner of the block front, the lots generally are 3-story mixed-use buildings with commercial uses on the ground floor and residential units above. Next. And towards the northern corner of the block front, the lots range from 2 to 4 stories, residential and mixed-use building, which contain commercial uses on the ground floor and residential units above. Next. The applicant is proposing to build a new 5-story building of approximately 88 square feet of mixed use, containing commercial uses on the ground floor and residential uses above. The commercial uses are proposed to be approximately 5,200 square feet, and the residential units that will be created will be 7. There are no parking spaces provided in the site. Next. The action necessary to facilitate the proposed development is the requested zoning map amendment to add a C14 commercial overlay over the existing R6A and R6B zoning districts on the eastern side of Bedford Avenue between Northern 8th and Northern 10th Street. Next. This project was certified on November 2nd of 2020. Community Board 1 held a hearing in December 7th of 2020 and recommended to approve the application. And the Brooklyn Borough President held a hearing in December 21st of 2020 and recommended to approve the application with conditions. Next. The conditions are that prior to consider the application, City Council should obtain agreed commitments from the applicant to construct a ground floor that occupies the entirely zoning lot to mitigate the noise from any future eating or drinking establishment, to memorialize resiliency and sustainability measures, to coordinate the installation of rain gardens with appropriate agencies, and for the applicant to retain Brooklyn-based contractors and subcontractors, especially to target LBEs, MWBEs in compliance with local law 1. Next. The public hearing is scheduled for tomorrow. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Alejandra. Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you. Alejandra, could you go back to the rendering of the project for a moment?
Yes, I think we can bring back either the first slide or the last one that has the rendering. Maybe. Well,
yeah, that'll do. The the lower portion of the project, yeah, is that roof, is the roof, the exposed roof area there, is that supposed to be accessible by the tenants, or do you know? Is that why they have, they've stacked the 5 stories, you know, rather than having an additional floor?
I don't have information of why the architect is proposing that the building height varies from 3 to 5 stories, nor we have floor plans that tell us how, if the roof are accessible for the tenants of the building. I can ask them to provide more information tomorrow during the public hearing.
Thank you.
And I do not see other raised hands, so this will go to public hearing tomorrow.
7th item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of a zoning map and zoning text amendment in Bronx Community District 1. Our presenter is Manny Lagares. Please note that Commissioner Alpashad is recused from this item.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is the 431 Concord Avenue rezoning. Next slide, please. The applicant is the Concord Realty LLC. They're proposing a zoning map amendment from M12 to R7D to facilitate the construction of an 11-story development with 88 units. They're also seeking a zoning text amendment to Appendix F of the zoning resolution designating the rezoning area as an MIH area. The project area was, this area was zoned M11 in 1961. In 64, it was zoned M1-2. And in 1998, one of the parcels within the development site was disposed. Next slide, please. The project area is located on the northeastern portion of a block that is bounded by East 145th Street on the north, Concord Avenue on the east, on the south by East 144th Street, and Jackson Avenue to the west. The project area consists of portions of 3 contiguous lots, and immediately to the west is an R71 zoning district where you have a 6-story residential building with 60 units. Across 145th Street, you have a school. Across Concord Avenue, you have residential development and have 1 and 2 family homes, a couple of vacant parcels. To the north of that, you can see that you have a higher scale development, residential development. And to the south, you have the site is immediately adjacent to a 1-story industrial building. And as you go further south, it is within the M12, you have high lot coverage, low-rise industrial and commercial uses. Next slide, please. Okay, as you can see, the site is outlined in brown. The development site is in blue. And to the left is St. Mary's Park. To the northeast of this slide, you see the Crossroads Plaza and the 147th Street rezoning, which were approved by the City Planning Commission and account for approximately 400 units of residential. Next slide, please. This is your land use map. And then again, you can see by the yellow that you do have anywhere from 1 to 6-story developments. And to the south of that, the area transitions into industrial. Next slide, please. The photograph on the upper left, that's your project area. Where you see the tree in green, that's lot 18. That's the lot that was disposed of and approved by the commission back in 1998. Adjacent to that is lot 16. Lot 16 at one time contained a house of worship where you have the yellow building as well as where you have the white building. And the photo on the right, you can see it's a 1-story garage building. Next slide, please. Your existing and proposed zoning, the project area is zone M1-2. Doesn't allow for residential development. Instead, it allows commercial and light industrial uses as well as community facilities. The applicant is thereby establishing an R7D, which would allow him to construct the 11-story residential development. Next slide, please. This is the rendering of what the building would look like. It's 115 feet in height, 11 stories, all residential, 88 units, 29 accessory parking spaces, which will be on the ground floor, besides the residential lobby, the amenities, mechanical rooms. The 29 accessory parking spaces will be enclosed and unenclosed. There will be a rear yard of 42 feet. Floors 2 through 9 will consist of 76 units, 10 and 11, 6 units each, for a total of 88 units. Approximately 76,000 square feet of residential floor area. This morning, the applicant informed me that he anticipates using option 1, which will be 30% of 30% of the residential units, which will be 22 units for affordable housing. Next slide, please. And this is the community board and borough president's recommendations. We did not receive a recommendation from community board number 1. We've tried several times and received nothing. The Bronx Borough President, we received his recommendation is for approval of the application. I also want, before I take questions, to let the commission know that in their package, there is a letter from the applicant, which explains the reason why the reduction in units, which was originally, when it was certified, 92 units, now it's 88. And he did that at the request of the Bronx Borough President, who wanted to see larger units. In addition to that, the letter talks about the review session item that came up, the question. He wanted just to clarify that lot 18 was purchased in, lot 16 was purchased in 2017 by the applicant, and that at that time, the buildings were vacant. There were no houses of worship at the time. The buildings were vacant. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Manny.
You're welcome.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Yes, thank you, Manny. I just wanted to clarify. You said that the developer was going to utilize option 1 of MIH.
Yes, I found out this morning that he's going for option 1.
Well, that is 25% of the square footage,
Yes.
is it not, rather than 30?
You're correct. Yes, it's 25% of the units. Sorry about that.
All right, thank you.
Okay, you're very welcome.
Commissioner Marin.
Manny, thank you for the information on the church building. That was something that was concerning to me.
Okay, you're welcome.
Only because I'll be honest with you, the dates that you're giving me, and you know, I live in the neighborhood, so I pass by that neighborhood all the time, and the date that you're giving me was not the date that the church was enacted. But at this point, if the church is not making an issue out of it, then I could just really, you know, I have to bow. I have to just say I give up on that. However, I had requested, if possible, some renderings from the street view and from the rear of the building. And I don't know if the applicant has prepared those or is willing to prepare those for tomorrow. And my other concern, which we all know, the department knows, is I'd like to see, if possible, I know we talked about this, Carol and I and the team and the Bronx team spoke about this on a couple of occasions, about studying that Southern Boulevard corridor to St. Mary's Park from 149th Street down to the Bruckner, because there's a lot of action happening there. At the end of the Bruckner, we know that the jail is proposed. And so a more cohesive plan for this neighborhood, I think, is in order at this point. I just want to point that out. And I do hope that the value engineering on the building doesn't remove the balcony. They look really nice.
Okay. Yes, I will convey that information to Carol and Sean.
Yes, and if the applicant could come with some renderings, that would really be appreciated because they've been requested and I don't know where they've gone. This has been a while here.
Okay, yes, I will call them today.
Commissioner Burney.
Thank you. Manny, I guess I'd put this question to Commissioner Marin as well. Are we not concerned about the continuing loss of low-cost industrial manufacturing space in the city? It seems that every developer buys a piece of manufacturing land at low cost, gets it rezoned to residential, takes their money and goes, and yet we're not making more manufacturing space, we're just losing it. Is that not a concern?
Well, I'm going to defer to Sean. Sean is also listening to the presentation, and I will get back to you on that.
Oh, here's Sean is going to.
Sean is there. Okay. Yes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Burney. One thing I would say, and that's certainly a concern as we look at each of these rezonings that would come through, is that this site in particular is a block from the park and has residential development backing up to it. And we know that we have 2 vacant sites here. So in this case, it certainly seemed to make sense, but it is something that we certainly weigh as we look at each of these.
Okay, but on balance, you think this is probably better off being a residential zone anyway, is what you think?
But that's right. And actually in the borough president's recommendation, he notes that concern as well, and indicates that in particular this site would seem to make sense given its proximity to transit and proximity to the park and the long-term vacancy of the buildings there that we're not manufacturing.
Yeah.
For some
okay.
time.
Yeah.
I would have many.
Please, Commissioner.
I'm sorry, David, since you also addressed the question to me, I will tell you that, and in terms of my conversations with the borough president's office, there is no concern. In this manufacturing district, what you find is a lot of car repair shops, and most of the larger warehouse buildings are not-for-profit providers that aren't manufacturing. So the community, in fact, does not have a high manufacturing base, and quite honestly is well poised for residential, and we all acknowledge that.
Yeah. Okay, good, thank you.
And I just want to emphasize what Sean said, which is it is an absolutely case-by-case evaluation of the parcels. It's not an across the board M goes to R.
Understood.
Other questions? Okay, another public hearing tomorrow.
The 8th item on our agenda is the non-ULURP post-referral review of a minor modification to a previously approved special permit in Manhattan Community District 1. Our presenter is Allison Brown.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. 240 Greenwich Street was first presented to the Commission and referred to Manhattan Community Board 1 on January 4th of this year. Today, I will briefly recap the proposed actions and design and share the Community Board's resolution. Next slide, please. The applicant proposes a minor modification of a previous CPC special permit to modify the approved plans to remove the public lobby label from the ground floor plan and to reflect the improvement of an existing outdoor open space as a public access area. Next slide, please. To recap, the site was once owned by the city and leased to the Irving Trust Company. As described previously, 240 Greenwich Street was part of the now expired Washington Street Urban Renewal Area, which anticipated that the developer of 240 Greenwich would maintain an elevated north-south pedestrian walkway that would connect the second level of 240 Greenwich Street to the buildings north of Murray Street and to the buildings south of Barclay Street. In this diagram, we see 240 Greenwich Street. The lot is highlighted in red, with the envisioned north-south elevated pedestrian connections shown in the arrows across the diagram. The elevated public walkway was to be accessed from within the lobby of the building by escalators running to the second level. The site was required as part of the city lease agreement and the urban renewal plan to allow the public exit from and entrance to the building through the main ground level entrance at or near Barclay Street in order to gain public access to the second level walkway. In 1989, there was an amendment to the Washington Street Urban Renewal Area, eliminating both the north-south pedestrian easement across Barclay and Murray Street
and eliminating the elevated public walkway within the building. The city lease agreement of the property was also amended in 1990 to reflect this change, eliminating references to both the ground floor and second floor public access. Concurrently to the urban renewal plan and lease updates, recorded CPC special permit drawings on the site were updated, removing the public access on the second floor of the building. However, at this time, the ground floor drawing was never updated, and today the vestigial label public lobby remains. As mentioned in my last presentation, there is no nexus between the special permit actions, which allowed height and setback relief, and the provisions of the public space. Next slide, please. As part of the proposed action, the applicant proposes to make considerable improvements to the existing open space on the zoning lot, which is not currently captured as a POPS. Consistent with the standards for plazas, the applicant will record the approved drawings along with the commitment to make the space accessible to the public on a 24-hour basis and maintain the space accordingly. The design of the 23,800 square foot public access area was guided by the standards in the zoning resolution governing public plazas. Here we see a rendered view of the corner of Greenwich Street and Barclay Street with the envisioned amenities of seating and planting within the public access area. Next slide, please. Here's a view of the corner of Murray and West Street. Here we see the envisioned split driveway, one for the Bank of New York and one for DC 37. DC 37's easement requirement for pedestrian vehicular access to the building through the development site. Next slide, please. Here we can see a closer ground view of the public access area. Here we see wayfinding signage and again, ample planting and seating. Next slide, please. And then this is one final view of the PAA with Murray Street behind us looking towards the DC 37 building. Next slide, please. The application was referred to Manhattan Community Board 1 on January 4th, 2021. Subsequent to a public hearing on January 26th, the board issued a resolution. The community board voted 37 in favor, none opposed, 2 abstained, and none recused to both oppose the portion of the minor modification application that seeks to eliminate the reference to the public lobby and voted to support and approve that portion of the application that proposes modifications to the outdoor open areas on the project site, consisting of the creation of the 23,800 square foot public access area and the new seating, plantings, and other amenities within. Here is a list of conditions to that support and approve of the public access area. In response to each condition, the applicant team has provided a letter of response which was shared with the commission on Friday. The first 3 conditions listed relate to the design of the public access area. The conditions state that the applicant incorporate into its PAA designs a relationship between the public lobby space and the PAA, that the applicant revise its plans in order to retain and incorporate the city bike station into the PAA or nearby, and the design plans for the northwest corner of the PAA, that's at the corner of West and Murray, should also incorporate some kind of buffer to the wind and noise from West Street in the form of vegetation or landscaping. At the time of referral, the City Planning Commission also commented that the proposed design does not incorporate the city bike station. In their letter, the applicant recognizes that the existing city bike docking station located at the northwest corner of the site is popular and well used by the public. The applicant team is in continued conversations with City Bike to discuss future possible placement adjacent to the site. The applicant also notes, sorry, if we could go back one slide. The applicant also notes that they have proactively commenced conversations with City Bike so that all stakeholders can plan appropriately before construction starts. The applicant's contract with City Bike allows, upon 90 days notice for either the applicant or City Bike to terminate the agreement governing the docking station. The applicant also notes in their letter that a key design goal for the northwest corner of the PAA is to enhance circulation at the intersection of West Street and Murray Street, while maintaining an easy access to the DC 37 building entrance. The existing condition creates a pinch point at the intersection of West and Murray, and as a result, the sidewalk at this intersection is often very congested. By raising the existing grade of the plaza as proposed to match the sidewalk level, the proposed design significantly improves the pedestrian experience in and around the intersection, and the installation of a buffer along the perimeter of the Northwest Plaza would diminish pedestrian circulation space at the intersection. The fourth condition of the community board was that DC 37 must be closely consulted and engaged. The applicant did discuss the application and proposed design with DC 37 leadership at the design stage of this project. And as noticed previously, DC 37 has an easement on the site so that pedestrian vehicles can access 125 Barclay Street. And then finally, Community Board 1 strongly opposes the addition of numerous bollards planned for the periphery of the site located at the public right-of-way. We can now go to the next slide. Thank you. So at the time of referral, the City Planning Commission also commented on the numerous bollards. As part of a separate revocable consent application, the applicant will propose to locate security bollards within the city's right-of-way adjacent to the site. Installation of the bollards at the curb line will be subject to New York City and New York State DOT review and Public Design Commission approval. NYPD has completed a security review of the site and determined that based on its threat assessment, the site warrants protection with bollards. The proposed bollard type and placement will comply with NYPD requirements. The applicant has been in consultation and coordination with numerous agencies, NYPD, DOB, New York City, New York State, DOT, DEP, FDNY, DDC, and DCP regarding the size, location, spacing of the proposed bollards. Here you can see in red and yellow highlight an early iteration of the proposed bollard alignment prior to this consultation effort. The proposed bollard line is today proposed to be pushed to the curb around the entirety of the lot, which we believe will allow for ease of pedestrian movement and navigation through the public space. Next slide, please. So to conclude, as a minor modification, there will be no public hearing on this action. As mentioned previously, the applicant team has provided a letter for the commission's consideration, which was sent to the commission on Friday. And thank you for your time. I can now answer any further questions.
Thank you, Allison. Questions from the commission? Commissioner Burney.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. I was just trying to get a hold of the letter again, but I have to say, I mean, it seems to me CV1's concerns are pretty legitimate. I mean, what was the applicant's response to the idea that the public lobby designation should not be removed?
So as you saw in the letter, the response to that particular item was quite lengthy. The short synopsis that I can provide from the letter is that the applicant states the record does not in any way support a conclusion that following the elimination of the requirement to provide the second floor walkway at the site, the ground floor area designated as a public lobby was intended to operate as a privately owned public space. As I mentioned in my presentation, there is no nexus between the zoning actions on the site, which was the CPC special permit to allow heightened setback relief, and the provisions of the space. This is really a vestigial of a previous approvals related to an urban renewal plan.
But I mean, it has been a public space since then, right? And it's been a de facto in use by the public. And
no, it's an entry to an office building.
But it's a public space, though. It's a public place. In other words, it was built that way. It was used that way. No,
it was intended as part of a long past urban renewal plan that anticipated that there would be second floor circulation among buildings. And when that requirement was removed, we have this vestige where the language of what was done didn't comport with the drawings. Basically, at that time, the drawings weren't updated. Also, it's not a bonus space in any way.
Right. No, I understand the going away, the second floor going away. I just don't quite understand why we would lose the public access to the ground floor space. But yeah. Okay. And then my second question was, about the bollards. I mean, what they've done effectively by moving the bollards out to the curb, apart from adding more, is that now street vendors, for example, food trucks can't get access to the sidewalk. So I don't know that that's necessarily an improvement, and I don't see why it's certainly not a security improvement. It seems to me that's not what I would have done anyway.
It was felt that instead of meandering through the public space, both the the right of way, the sidewalk, and the PAA itself, it was better to be at the curb so that a pedestrian walking through the site would essentially only cross the bollard line once, and you don't have these intrusions in the middle of the public space, but only at the edge of the public space.
I'll note that this is an area where urban designers could disagree, but we thought it actually contributed to the amenity of the sidewalk and the public space to have it be a larger contiguous space, not interrupted by the bollards, while sharing the commissioner's concerns about bollards, but recognizing that it's the public safety agencies that are driving the requirement.
Okay, that was my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Well, thank you. Just an observation, in the good old days before the pandemic, I would park in this area for CPC meetings. And I'd walk by this building, several times a month. I never noticed that there was a POPs location within the building. But I'll say, I think, well, first, I support the community board's conditions. I think they're reasonable and if adopted would enhance what I think is a vast improvement over the current landscape around that building, both on Greenwich as well as Barclay, fronting DC 37, which I always thought was an underutilized space with regard to public access and public enjoyment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cirillo.
So my two immediate thoughts were actually raised by Commissioner Burney, although I think I might have had a reverse point of view on it. I seem to understand the elimination. I mean, I support or don't object to the elimination of the sort of lobby designation based on what the intent of the lobby designation was in the first place and the sort of the lack of relevance of it at the moment, although obviously, finding privately owned public space wherever we can is always helpful. But I think in this particular case, it makes sense. I also just wanted to comment on the bollard issue, although there's been lots of conversation, and Madam Chair, you filled in some of those blanks. I am often frustrated by the enforcement authorities' take on, obviously we're always primarily concerned with the public's safety in public spaces, but sometimes the way the decision-making occurs is not necessarily the most, it's not in a collective way that is always supportive of what the community's needs are on top of the public safety concerns. So I get it, only because I'm dealing with it constantly. But I think what they've done with it actually makes sense. The vendor issue that Commissioner Burney raised, I'm not sure I embrace that as well either. But the fact is that there's so much lacking in the enforcement of vendors, and particularly illegal vendors in the city. I'm sure there'll be 1, 2, or 10 that'll find their way there with no repercussions at some point in the future, unfortunately. The one thing I wanted to ask about the public access area, on page 4 of the presentation, there was a very nice sort of the rendering of it. Is there a defined area of the PAA? What we're seeing is actually going to the curb and the crosswalks. And I'm assuming that that's not going to be that much of it will not be the responsibility for maintenance. So how is that for the public's point of view in terms of a lot of issues, particularly liability, which my head goes to immediately in this? How is there a definition of what has to be maintained by, I'm assuming, ownership, and what will be maintained, what would not have to be maintained by ownership?
Absolutely. If we could pull up the slide again, the slideshow again showing the plan.
It was page 4. I think I noted page 4. And
sure. So I can say generally. So if we could actually go back to the second slide. Thank you. So we see here that the red dashed line, that's the zoning lot boundary. So the PAA is everything that is open space within that zoning lot boundary, with the exception of the driveway areas. That's what's captured as the PAA. The owner would obviously be maintaining that. Separately, they're proposing other furniture such as bollards outside of their own zoning lot within the public right-of-way. And as a revocable consent application, there would be separate maintenance agreements in relation to that. So if we go back to page 4, as you showed, as a pedestrian walking down the street, this is really just perceived as a
it's
seamless,
invisible.
very
Yeah, the
well
line is
constructed.
invisible. Yeah. But there will be, Allison, there will be a legal agreement between the city and ownership with respect to all the obligations, regardless of where they're agreeing to maintain assets. So whether it's in the public right-of-way or it's within the zoning lot, they will be agreeing to maintain certain things.
Right. It would just be separate agreements. So within the PAA, there would be a notice of restriction on the site with requirements of maintenance. And then separately for the revocable consent application, there would be, another document of maintenance requirements for items in the right of way.
Understood. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Ortiz.
This seems to be a day to talk about biking. I appreciate,
Any day is a day to talk about biking.
True. The city bike request, I appreciate that. And also the acknowledgement that that's a very popular city bike location. It is right off of really an important transportation thoroughfare for cyclists up and down Hudson River Park. And I think we should embrace that and acknowledge it. As part of this plan, there are 4 bike racks proposed for building with almost 1 million square feet. I'm curious how much on-site bike parking they have and bike storage, if that's sufficient, or if we should request more. I know that bike parking is really, really challenging these days. And as more people shift to that mode of transportation, we should encourage it in places where it needs to be. So that's sort of a question that I have. And then, the other is that I know DOT has a process by which tenants can ask for, the allowance to bring their bikes into the building. And again, it's all part of this. Do we have sufficient bicycle storage in this public space? But do they have, and have they developed a bicycle access plan for the building, again, to just give us sufficient information to determine whether we're providing the right amenities in this public space?
Thank you. It's a great point and question, and I can come back to the commission with more details on any parking for bicycles within the building or the ability to expand the bike racks outside in the PAA. Thank you.
I'll also note that unlike many matters that come before us, this is a request for a minor modification. Obviously, it's not a new approval. We will note that City Bike is in discussions. They are in discussions with City Bike, but that they can't be finalized until they know what the contours of this public area is. And I would share your sense, Commissioner Ortiz, that this is an extremely heavily used bike area. Commissioner Burney, also with respect to your comment about the street vendors, that entire stretch of Greenwich Street, as I think you know from traversing the area, is quite popular with street vendors because of having an office population when offices are populated, but also a residential population, not to mention a supermarket there that draws a lot of people to the adjoining blocks.
And didn't we just expand the number of street vending permits as well? I think the city just did that, so we're likely to see more vendors out there too.
BMCC is also in the neighborhood.
Yep. Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, so I've got questions, comments, observations, both about the PAA and about the public lobby, but sticking with the bike theme. You know, if the terms of the arrangements between City Bike and the applicant are that the siting can be terminated on 90 days notice, I should think we should ask the applicant to agree not to exercise that right of termination and just sail off into the work on the PAA until an alternate arrangement has been worked out with City Bike. If they have the ability to terminate on 90 days notice, they ought to agree not to exercise it until this problem is solved. Because I do think, echoing my colleagues' comments, that it's very important that we retain that City Bike capacity someplace nearby.
I would be happy to come back with more information on the City Bike station. You know, I will note the applicant has been in early consultation with City Bike on a location that could be placed, you know, on the site, or as I mentioned, adjacent to the site. As we've established previously, it's a very, what is perceived as a very wide sidewalk, and so there's a possibility of it still being very close by. You know, it's something difficult to get nailed down, as these, you know, there's a lot of moving pieces, I guess, at the same time, with consultation of various different agencies on, you know, what amenities are where. The proposed application in front of the commission today, we couldn't fit a City Bike in that northwest corner as it exists today and maintain the same array of amenities as proposed today. So the location of the City Bike station in that particular spot would require a fairly significant redesign.
Yeah, no, I'm not advocating for that at all, and I fully understand. I mean, essentially, the PAA today is nothing but a City Bike stand, right? Filled up with City Bikes. Yeah. No, what I'm suggesting is that we ought to really be sure that an alternate arrangement has been worked out, not necessarily on exactly that site, but someplace nearby that can serve the same, you know, the same people who are using it now will have easy access to a City Bike. And we ought to do everything we can to be sure that happens before this one gets removed. Staying with the PAA, I'm sympathetic to the community board's comment about the desirability of buffering to West Street. I wonder what DCP's urban design people, I'm sure you've looked at it, what potential is there for any more buffering? I get that it's, especially when you showed the slide 2 that shows the zoning lot, but it also shows the, you know, the bulb out of the sidewalk along West Street, and some of it's in the zoning lot and some of it isn't. It is a challenging corner, but with traffic on West Street zooming by and the wind coming in from the west, it's not the most, it's not the place you'd pick first for public access area. I mean, just for seating. Is there Are there any measures that the urban design folks have come up with that might improve that location? I'm assuming not, or you wouldn't have gotten this far in the process.
I'd actually go even a step further on that, Commissioner, and note that we view this as an area for transit. It's very heavily used. Crowds of people line up there to cross, so because it's such a convenient place to cross West Street to get to Battery Park City, and that the amenities were concentrated further away from West Street, and that we did not want to create a pinch point there. Very much viewed it as a place where you wouldn't want to sit and have a quiet conversation with the highway next to you. And so that's why we were comfortable with the focus on having the bulb out there and having that be a place of movement and transit rather than reflection on a chair or a table.
Yes, exactly, as the chair has just said.
So the answer is essentially no, we're not going to buffer it. Because that's in conflict with the purpose that we see.
Yes, exactly. The buffering would not allow us to, elevate the space as a space of pedestrian access through the site and circulation.
Right.
And the other thing that I'd note is also taken in the context of the entire PAA, there are significant other portions of the site which are buffered, which do have the seating and we think are more appropriate to sit down and talk with friends.
Okay, no, I was just really concerned about the, whatever barriers we could put in to, anyway, I get it, enough on that one. On the public lobby question, I mean, this just goes to show that communities have very, very long memories about these things. I would find myself, I am largely persuaded by the precise, lawyerly, careful, historical analysis that David Karnofsky gave us on behalf of the applicant, but for two things. One is the suggestion in the Communities Board's letter that this public lobby, in fact, did serve, that there is local memory of people using the public lobby as public space without the connection. And I'm curious to know more about what more do we know about what actual use there was of it? And because I can't believe it's an accident that things don't happen by accident that you amend the plans. It's not just an accident that it got taken off the second floor plan and left on the ground floor plan. And that it's continued in the city database as a POPS. You go look at the POPS information and it says this is a POPS. So maybe there is history that this did function not as the kind of POPS with seating and kiosks and planters and all of the amenities that we now build into POPSes, but that it had historically some aspect of public access to it. And I would just like to understand more about that before signing on to the applicant's assertion that this is simply vestigial.
So I'd like to welcome our Deputy General Counsel, Allison McKee.
I actually think that let us come back because I'm also hearing from you, Commissioner Levin, that you're looking also for some historic memory of it. What I find is interesting is if one thinks back to those giant square books, maybe circa 1975, one for each borough, the greening of Greenwich, the widening of Greenwich, the construction of these extra wide sidewalks is already included in there. And so you're right, there is quite a lot of history here.
The days of comprehensive planning, you see. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and so I'd add to all of that. I mean, it looks to me from the plans of the current lobby that it's configured, it's proposed to be configured largely as it previously was with, street doors at the street, obviously, and but that the security scan area is not until you get to the elevator portion. So in fact, will this area be publicly accessible in the same way that it was before? It just won't have escalators going to the second floor as shown on the plan.
Mhm.
Is it going to have the same degree of porousness that it had before? So maybe this is all much ado about nothing. I don't know.
Okay, thank you for the discussion of this. And what we'll do is come back at a subsequent review session to be able to address the good questions, concerns raised by the commissioners.
Okay.
And also at the same time to talk about the nature of the action that's before the commission and what exactly the requested minor modification is.
And perhaps also for members of the community who may be listening to this review session, if anyone has any historical information about how this public lobby functioned as a public space, now would be the time to make that available to us.
We can also reach out to the community board on that as well.
I can note on that at the community board hearing, there was members of the public who recalled being able to access the lobby. I guess there was a cafe in the lobby space at some point. So you could access the lobby and patron the cafe, all pre 9/11.
Okay, but yeah, all right, but no one's claiming that a cafe is a necessary amenity in there.
No, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Or that it was just that there was access to the site and you could go in and drink coffee.
Well, that's always a good thing to do.
Okay.
Now it's going to be vendors on the sidewalk that provide the coffee.
Thank you
We
very
need a
much.
healthy mix of both.
Right. Thank you.
Well, again, thank you to the commission, and we'll be back with this.
Thank you.
Okay, commissioners, moving on. The ninth item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of a zoning text amendment in Manhattan Community District 2. Our presenter is Andrew Cantu.
Thanks, Edwin. Could we go to slide 2, please? Thanks. This is a private application by Kenmare Square LLC for zoning text amendment to modify the sub-district boundaries of the Special Little Italy District in Manhattan Community District 2. The development site consists of 2 lots on the east side of Cleveland Place between Spring Street and Kenmare Street, opposite Petrosino Square, just west of Mulberry Street. Next slide, please. The northern lot, 25 Cleveland Place, is improved with a 40-foot tall tenement building occupied by a restaurant on the ground floor and 5 rental dwelling units above. The southern lot, 23 Cleveland Place, is improved with a 30-foot tall tenement building with a ground floor commercial unit that is currently vacant and 2 rental dwelling units on the upper floors. The residential tenants all have short-term leases, which will expire in 2021, and none of them are rent regulated. The development site is typical of the Nolita/Little Italy neighborhood, which is characterized by narrow lots with high lot coverage tenement style buildings, most between 4 and 6 stories tall. However, the western edge of the special district, where Little Italy borders Soho along Lafayette Street, taller buildings, bulkier buildings above 100 feet taller are pretty common. These buildings are overwhelmingly mixed use with retail or eating and drinking uses on the ground floors and residential above. Next slide, please. This is a plan view of the east side of Cleveland Place with the development site highlighted in yellow. And in this diagram, north is to your left. 25 Cleveland Place is entirely within Area A, shaded in purple, and 23 Cleveland Place to the south is split between Area A and Area C, shaded in blue. But because the majority of 23 Cleveland Place's street frontage is within Area C, those regulations control for that lot. Next slide, please. The applicant is proposing to move the boundary of Area C 25 feet north from 100 feet to 125 feet north from Kenmare Street so that it captures the majority of the frontage of the development site and could be developed pursuant to Area C regulations. Next slide, please. Both subdistricts permit the uses allowed in the underlying C6 commercial districts, use groups 1 through 12, including use group 6B offices, except that Area A prohibits use group 6D, which contains public service establishments like police stations, use group 10, large retail establishments, and use groups 8C and 12D, which are auto-related uses. In Area A, the floor area ratio for all uses is 4.1. In Area C, there is no maximum FAR for residential use, but given the other bulk and lot coverage regulations of Area C, the effective maximum residential FAR for this specific site is 4.8, and the maximum commercial FAR in Area C is 6.0. Both subdistricts have the same lot coverage regulations for residential use, 60%, but for commercial uses in Area C, lot coverage regulations are less restrictive, 100% at the ground floor and 70% above the ground floor. At 85 feet, Area C allows slightly taller buildings than Area A, where height is capped at 75 feet. Next slide, please. This is an elevation showing the eastern block face of Cleveland Place with the development site in yellow. And to the south of the development site are 4 tenement buildings that fall within Area C. Next slide, please. This elevation shows the site redeveloped pursuant to Area C regulations. And as you can see, the Area C height limit is a relatively modest increase over the 75-foot limit for Area A. And the tenements to the south could be redeveloped with the 85-foot tall buildings as of right. Next slide, please. These massings show how the proposed amendment would impact the site. On your left is the development site under existing conditions. On your right is what a building might look like under Area C bulk regulations. And in the middle is an example of a building with a 65-foot tall street wall that could be developed under Area A regulations. The applicant is currently proposing to develop an 8-story, 30,000 square foot commercial building with ground floor retail or other commercial space and offices above. I think we should note, though, that these massings are illustrative, and the design of any future building may change based on market conditions. Next slide, please. On January 11th, Manhattan Community Board 2 voted 42-1 to disapprove the application. Their major concerns focus primarily on what they perceive to be out of character commercial office development and what is primarily a residential area. They also expressed concerns over potential quality of life impacts related to increased traffic and noise that a larger ground floor restaurant or bar or destination retail establishment might bring. And lastly, they prefer that the design of the proposed building better reflect the character of the neighboring built context, specifically related to materiality, setbacks, and preserving the rear yard. Next slide, please. The Manhattan Borough President recommended denial unless the applicant meet with the community to develop a proposal that addresses the community board's concerns having to do with possible nuisances and remedy all open violations. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the commission? Okay, we will be learning more on the public hearing tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, the 10th item on our agenda is the City Council modification scope determination for the Schubert Court Theater Rehab Special Permit in Manhattan Community District 5. Ezra Moser is here to discuss.
Good afternoon, Commission. Ezra Moser here. We have 2 very small changes to the text amendment component of this application. You know, as you probably remember, there was a text amendment to the to ZR section 81-745, which is the special permit that allows a bonus for the rehab of a theater. And then there was a special permit pursuant to that section as amended. So the council's changes focused on one paragraph within the text, where the as approved by the commission, it read, except that in the case of a zoning lot located wholly or partially in a C6 5.5 district, which applies to the court theater, the commission may allow bonus floor area to be utilized anywhere on the zoning lot. So those provisions were essentially allowing for the bonus floor area generated by a split lot to be utilized anywhere on the lot, so to cross zoning district boundaries. The council deleted the word wholly, or the words wholly or, and wholly or partially in a C6 5.5 district. It was really about semantics. It's pro forma zoning language, but they pointed out correctly that this wouldn't apply to a zoning lot that was located wholly in a C6 5.5 district, because this is about split lots. So they deleted those words, and then they also added in for zoning lots that are partially in a C6 5.5 district and partially in a C6 7T district. So this was a request that was actually initially put forward by the community board and then echoed by the borough president. And the purpose was, at least initially the community board, that they believed that it would make it applicable to the court theater alone, because the court theater is split between a C6 5.5 and a C6 7T district. However, there are a number of additional theaters that are also partially in a C6 5.5 and a C6 7T district. So we felt that the requested change during the CPC stage wasn't substantive, because it didn't actually limit it to the to just the court theater. However, again, you know, this is something that the council is putting forward. It is within scope. The way that the commission approved the text, there were 6 total theaters, including the court theater, that fit this geographic description, that were partially in a C6 5.5 district. When the text is added to change that to partially in a C6 5.5 district and partially in a C6 7T district, there are 4 theaters that would then fit this description. However, I just want to point out in both cases that no additional theaters can actually use these provisions for a variety of reasons, primarily being that they're either already overbuilt, they've already undertaken substantial rehabs, or they're subject to a GPP. So with that, any questions?
Again, I'll note that these are clarifications entirely consistent with the commission's approval. And so the department has absolutely no concerns about them. Commissioner Levin.
I have no concerns about the fundamentals of what we're doing here, but I do have concerns about the draft letter, which is the first time we've had one of these scope letters back to us after we had that exchange a couple of meetings ago about how we phrase these letters and, you know, what does scope mean and why are we doing this and so forth. I
can address that, Commissioner. We are still at the department looking at the best way to address the letters. We thought that we would go with the version of the letter that was sent out because this is a non-controversial one. It's not one where, from a planning point of view, we have concerns, but we will be coming back to the commissioners before we have one where we have a planning policy disagreement.
Okay, and just to clarify, because I think this was in an email exchange that I had with you and council and several other staff members, I had suggested that this letter might be more clear if we tracked the language in the charter that describes what we're doing at this time. And the charter requests that we report whether the modification requires additional review of environmental issues or additional review pursuant to section 197C. Personally, I think our form letter would be much more clear if we included that phrase. Totally irrelevant at this point, but I'm glad you're looking at it and look forward to hearing back more.
No, we very much appreciate quite a number of commissioners have raised the issue. And so we want to give serious thought so that we get it right once and for all and have a letter that properly addresses both what is required of the commission and our relationship with the city council, which is an important facet of the work that we do.
Okay, good. I'm glad you're working on it. Thank you.
And I'll note that the next scope determination that comes up again, which we'll discuss next, falls into the same category of being raising not a single policy issue.
Great. Thanks for that.
Others? Okay, then I will ask for approval to send a scope letter, a scope determination letter to the council. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ezra.
Thank you.
Right, the 11th item on our agenda is the City Council scope determination for the 42-01 28th Avenue rezoning, which is located in Queens Community District 2. Please note that Commissioner Rapashad was recused on this item. The modification eliminates MIH option 2 and keeps option 1. Upon review, staff have determined that this modification is within scope.
And any questions? This is perhaps the most frequent scope or modification that we see from the council. Seeing no hands, I'll again ask for assent to send a scope determination to the council.
Aye.
Aye. Commissioner
Aye.
Levin, did you want to speak on this?
No, I was just raising my hand, yes.
Okay. Any opposed? Thank you.
Okay, the next item on our agenda today is future votes. For February 17, 2021, staff have prepared reports for 61-63 Crosby Street in Manhattan, 5 Mercer Street located in Manhattan, the Flatiron Bid Expansion located in Manhattan, 110 East 16th Street Garage Renewal located in Manhattan, and Auburn East located in Queens. Okay, moving on. We also have reports prepared for 91-32 63rd Drive rezoning in Queens. Commissioner Rapashad is recused on this item. 245-01 Jamaica Avenue rezoning located in Queens. 44th Avenue demapping located in Queens. Commissioner Edie is recused on this item. We have listed 448, 452, and 454 Robinson Avenue. This item has been laid over. 158 Wiener Street on Staten Island and 71 Harborview located on Staten Island.
Before we move on, I just want to give special thanks to the various teams, the various offices that prepared this large number of reports, and also to the land use review team, which sees all of the reports. What we're seeing now is the working through the system of the many applications that came following the pause. And so I just want to thank them for that work, and also thank the commissioners for the extra reading that you had in your packet this weekend.
Okay, the next items are post-hearing follow-ups. For post-hearing, we have 69 Adams Street located in Brooklyn Community District 2. Josh Vogel is here to discuss.
Thanks, Edwin. Good afternoon, commissioners. I just have a brief update following the last post-hearing on 69 Adams. We want to give the commission an update on a question asked at the last review session about the proceeds from the sale. The proceeds will go to the city to be used by the city, whether directly or through EDC, to fund policy priorities. With the economic impact of COVID, it is even more important that EDC and the city maintain flexibility in deploying this revenue to fund initiatives for the benefit of New Yorkers. Thank you.
I'll just add that the EDC is explicitly set up as a public benefit corporation under state law that allows it to retain funds through the sale of land, through leases, through rents that it obtains, for example, at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, and then to use them for its economic development purposes. We were so pleased during the early days of the pandemic when EDC was able to work with many of its manufacturing tenants to enable them to produce PPE. And that is one example of what EDC does with its retained funds. And in this instance, it is not yet determined where exactly the proceeds will go. Folks may also be aware that EDC on an annual basis makes payments to the city from the proceeds that it has. But we did want to clarify at the last meeting, we had said that the funds would go to the general fund. That has not yet been determined.
Okay, our next items are 1099 Webster Avenue, located in the Bronx. Again, this is for post-hearing follow-up. Harlem cluster sites located in Manhattan, and Governor's Island rezoning. Allison Brown is here to present and discuss.
Hello again, commissioners. The public hearing for Governor's Island was held on February 3rd. Today, I will be speaking to a few items that were raised at the hearing and discuss additional information that has come forth for the commissioners' consideration. Next slide, please. To quickly recap, the proposed actions include a zoning map and text amendment, which would help facilitate up to 4.275 million square feet of development, allow a variety of uses, and enhance and enlarge the South Island open space and pedestrian accessibility. Next slide, please. A joint public hearing for the DEIS and ULURP was held on February 3rd. And at the hearing, following the applicant presentation, 25 spoke in favor and 13 spoke in opposition. Next slide, please. So today's post-hearing follow-up session, I'll be discussing the letters provided to the Commission from the Trust for Governor's Island, and I'll be returning in 2 weeks for another post-hearing follow-up session to discuss the items on the right. Next slide, please. So 3 letters have been provided to the Commission from the Trust for Governor's Island. First, a copy of a letter provided from the Trust to Manhattan Community Board 1, responding to certain conditions within the Community Board's resolution, such as concerns about the island's open space and the Community Board's future engagement in the RFP process. The letter also details certain text modifications that the Trust is committing to making in light of the Community Board's concerns. Those text modifications include further limiting permitted uses in the open space subarea and further reducing the height of permitted obstructions, and amending the methodology of the base plane measurement to provide clarity and predictability in development outcomes. Second, a letter to the Commission at the Commission's request, detailing the Trust's financial model. And third, a letter from the Trust to the Commission describing the future RFP process and DCP and CPC's respective contribution and roles in that process. The DCP and City Planning Commission's involvement will take place in 4 distinct stages. Stage 1, drafting of the RFP design principles and guidelines, where prior to issuing any RFP, the Trust will consult with, solicit input from, and agree upon the design criteria with DCP to be included in these solicitations. The Trust and DCP will agree upon the scoring system for design elements and the weighting of both design elements and the design experience of respondents for judging RFP responses. In stage 2, RFP release, DCP will participate in drafting written responses to any questions or clarifications requests and will participate in Q&A sessions. In stage 3, RFP review and selection, DCP will review and provide comment on zoning, urban design, public realm, and design components of the proposal, and the Trust will consider all comments provided by the DCP to inform the selection. And finally, in stage 4, after RFP selection, where the Trust commits to briefing the City Planning Commission post-award to provide an overview of the winning conceptual design. Throughout this process, the Trust agrees to provide additional briefings to the City Planning Commission at the Chair's request. Next slide, please. So in response to concerns and comments raised by the City Planning Commission, Community Board 1, and Manhattan Borough President, I'll be returning in 2 weeks to discuss those items listed on the right, including building heights, space heights, and rooftop mechanical heights, the size and location of the waterfront esplanade, the base plane measurement methodology, the open space subarea and the permitted obstructions and uses within this area, and how to address post-2060 residential use on the island, and the amount of parking permitted on the island. Next slide, please. I can now take any further questions the Commission may have on the project at this time.
One thing that I would note is that in thinking about what the ongoing role of the commission and the department should be on a project that will be developing over time, we were very much informed by I think the solid practices that we had put in place with respect to Bronx Point. And then after that, the borough-based jails that has an ongoing role. I'm also heartened by the fact that our Manhattan office, our urban designers, have worked hand in glove with the trust and have developed a very good working relationship. And but we still thought it important nonetheless to have this letter committing to our participation through every phase of the RFP processes. And we will bring this back in 2 weeks. Oh, yes, Commissioner Bernie.
Just a quick thing. Alison, when this comes back on March 1st, could we also hear some more about the discussion we had at the last session on the relationship between the 4.5 million square feet and the revenue requirements in order to maintain Governor's Island, which was one of the justifications for such a large amount of development. And secondly, the discussion we had about the 8,000 to 10,000 trips that this generates and how you get those people on and off the island without, hiring a fleet of ferries all around the clock to do it. So if those two things could be addressed, I'd be interested to hear that too.
Absolutely. We can add those to the agenda. Thank you.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes, I have a couple of other ones that I hope are on your March 1st list. Allison, it's your lucky day with us. In addition to the items that Commissioner Bernie identified, we heard some testimony and we've had some written comment about the desirability of access, of being able to get down to the water. And I'm wondering if there's anything more you can say to us on March 1st about a commitment that there will be opportunities to touch the water. This island is unique in its location and its availability to citizens. That's an important thing. On your topic number 4, when we get to talking about uses, we heard testimony from the Billion Oyster Project, Earth Matters, and the school about the importance of their continued existence there. Now, whether or not they stay is a matter of discussion between the trust and those operators, but I think we need to be sure that the zoning that we put in place will allow those uses to continue if that's what the trust works out with them. So is composting allowed? Is growing oysters allowed? And if I've missed any of the current tenants, we just want to be sure that the trust retains the flexibility to be able to allow those folks to continue.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and then I'll say we heard a lot of testimony about the schools issue. And it's really persuasive to me that, that the testimony we heard about how the school is not properly supported by the DOE for its maritime curriculum. And if we really believe in the vision of this curriculum, it's just shameful that the city can't get it together to support this school. Now, I know that's not the trust's responsibility, and I know that the trust is working to make additional space available, but somehow in our comprehensive planning for the city, we really need to support that school. So I don't know where we go to get those extra resources, but that's something that shouldn't be overlooked in all of this. And then I just want to revert to the items that are on our agenda for today. Thank you for laying out the features of the trust letter to us over the weekend. It ends with an invitation that the City Planning Commission might be included in some of those briefings as DCP may from time to time request, and I'd like to request that you request it.
I believe the wording is as the chair might request, the chair.
Okay, all right, so Marisa, I do hope that you will request on our behalf that we get briefed in a manner similar, as you indicated, in a manner similar to the briefings we received through the borough-based jails, the development of the design guidelines, the RFP terms, and so forth going on. It shouldn't just be. I think we have a keen interest in this, and it shouldn't just be retained at the DCP level.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I think that we have a very good track record in that the other city entities that we've worked with have recognized how much they benefit by making presentations to the commission and getting the feedback. So I don't anticipate, one, there is no reluctance on my part to request it, and I don't anticipate any reluctance on the part of the trust to provide the briefings.
Okay, good. And then just on the question of the financial analysis that they provided, I have to say, I don't understand why it is that their tax, they show us a chart of anticipated expenses, which I can't second guess. It's obviously expensive to maintain those historical buildings, and there's going to be a lot of upkeep for the open space and so forth. So no questions for me on their expense budget, but the revenue budget I find confusing because it shows that the substantial portion of revenue comes from taxes. But then elsewhere, they say that 45% or 45% of the development is tax exempt. So are there pilots here? What's generating the taxes and how do they get to the trust? And I think that's a big piece of the financial model that I just don't get. And then the leasing numbers they gave us, again, it's not really our job to dig into those details, but the leasing numbers fall way far behind the tax numbers. So that doesn't make any sense to me. So all of which is, my predicate to being concerned about the question that Commissioner Burney started us off with. How do we match up the this enormous amount of development with the financial oomph that is really needed to maintain the island? I'm still a doubter.
Thank you. I will add all of those items onto the agenda when we return in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Thank you for raising them.
Commissioner Edie.
Thank you. I just had one other quick question to ask. I know they've talked about having multiple RFPs for different components of the project. I was wondering if they'd had, even on a preliminary basis, a sense of a schedule of when they think they'd release various components. If they do, it would be helpful to have.
Okay.
Thank you.
I can certainly add that to the agenda as well. Thank you.
Okay, we will have a robust discussion when we come back at our next review session. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Okay, continuing our discussions on post-hearing follow-ups. Next up, zoning for coastal flood resiliency, citywide zoning text amendment. Manuela Poedico is here to discuss.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, commissioners. So today our team brings back to you a couple of follow-up items that were briefly talked about in the community board referrals and at review session on February 1st. So this list includes recommendations that were submitted by community boards, borough presidents, as well as new topics that we heard back on February 3rd. So next slide, please. So the topics that we bring to you today, we're split into items that more directly relate to zoning and one item that goes beyond the proposal. The first two items relate to the proposed text applicability, which intends to encourage resiliency throughout the current and future floodplains. The first item touches upon the determination of such proposed geography as it relates to the future floodplain projections and how the proposal will function under changing flood maps. The second item relates to how the project interacts with regulations that apply within specific areas of the city's floodplain, more specifically with special districts and historic districts. And then the third item relates to the project's second goal, which is to support long-term resilient design of all building types, and are more specifically tied to the proposed height allowances and floor area exemptions and how those apply to new versus existing buildings. The fourth item generally tackles the permitted obstruction provisions for mechanical equipment proposed as part of the third goal, which is to allow for adaptation over time of the city's building stock. And then the fifth item speaks to the regulations for power systems, which take part within the fourth goal and applies citywide. The next item also relates to the fourth goal, which is to facilitate recovery by reducing regulatory obstacles, such as by reducing the exposure of vulnerable populations in areas that face high risk of coastal flooding. And then the last item is a new one, which was introduced at the public hearing and relates to how the project interacts with sustainability goals, more specifically about green infrastructure. So we believe that we can go through all of these items today. However, we of course welcome follow-up requests. Now I'll go through each item and stop actually for Q&A after each one. Next slide, please. So first, starting with the comment regarding the proposed geography, which includes both the 1% and the 0.2% floodplains. As mentioned in the project description, the 0.2% expansion area serves as a proxy for the high-end projection of the 2050s 1% annual chance floodplain, allowing the city to advance resiliency in the longer term. However, the Municipal Art Society at the public hearing suggested that the expansion area should reflect the 2080s projected 1% annual chance floodplain to better reflect the usable lifespan of buildings. So in response to that suggestion, we would like to provide the following clarification. ZCFR is actually being more conservative since the NPCC's high-end projection for the 2050s are roughly equivalent to the likely level of sea level rise for the 2100. So employing the standard will actually help ensure a high degree of safety and resiliency for buildings throughout their full life cycle. Coupled with the allowances for future-proofing in the proposal, we believe the current 2050 standard provides an appropriate level of resiliency and that no changes are warranted. Next slide, please. And then regarding FEMA's future changes to the flood insurance rate maps, one board in the Bronx had a specific comment that suggested that the update will occur in less than 1 year, and therefore the proposal is premature. However, as I noted in the review session in preparation for the public hearing, FEMA's target release date for the map update is still several years ahead, currently scheduled for release sometime in 2024. Therefore, there is no reason for us to have 3 or more years of exposure. Advancing the project at this time makes sense so the floodplain community can start advancing resiliency in the longer term as soon as possible. I also wanted to provide further clarification on how the CFR will work in the future, considering that flood risk maps will indeed change over time. The CFR's applicability was drafted in a way that allows its applicability to automatically change over time, whenever the flood maps are modified for Appendix G purposes, as opposed to requiring a text amendment each and every time the floodplain changes. So once FEMA's maps and Appendix G are updated, the zoning proposal would automatically snap to that new set of maps. So I would definitely welcome if there are any questions and follow up on these two particular items.
I think you can go on to the next topic, Manuela.
Sounds good, thank you. So going to slide number 5, please. Great. So moving along to this next item, you may recall that a general concern was also raised by a few Manhattan community boards, as well as the BP office and the Municipal Art Society at the public hearing, regarding how the CFR modifies the rules located within special districts and historic districts. One Bronx Community Board and the Riverdale Nature Preservancy also questioned that the project supersedes special districts. In a few instances, it was suggested that the building in these areas should be subject to the City Planning Commission's approval. So I'll start with historic districts and then I'll stop for questions. As I mentioned in the review session, LPC will continue to have jurisdiction over the approval process for retrofits of existing historic structures and for new construction proposed within historic districts. So by enabling ZCFR to continue to apply within these areas, buildings will have a greater chance to make resilience improvements or to be built resiliently. This is consistent with how the 2013 flood text applies today. Also, as previously noted, the main concern raised by Manhattan boards were about additional height and its potential impacts on historic districts. However, LPC does review proposed height of new buildings or additions to existing structures and may impose limits lower than what zoning allows if necessary to preserve their historical character. Ultimately, LPC really looks at projects on a case-by-case basis. Of course, we definitely understand the concerns raised and agree that resiliency must not conflict with the historical character of these areas, but that's a consideration that LPC is equipped to provide and consider, and therefore no changes to the proposal deemed necessary at this time. Next slide, please. sorry, one more. I would also note that at the federal level, FEMA already establishes a specific relief valve for historic structures. Currently, projects that receive approval from the LPC and or from the New York State Historical Preservation Office that trigger compliance with Appendix G requirements, they can pursue a variance with the BSA in case the repair or rehabilitation poses a conflict with the preservation of historic character and design of the structure. Last, I will also highlight that back in 2016, DCP coordinated closely with the LPC when developing the West Chelsea study to, among many other things, provide guidance to buildings within historic districts to pursue retrofit strategies that safeguard the historic integrity of buildings in the LPC designated historic districts. The results of that work can be found within our Resilient Neighborhoods page, and much of that work can be a helpful resource for other historic districts in the floodplain. And I'll definitely invite for questions if there is anything in historic districts.
It looks like you're on a roll, Manuela.
Okay, I'll keep going, definitely in the end if something comes up. So next slide, please. All right, so regarding special districts, while they cater to a range of locally specific conditions, the 2013 flood text already applied to special districts within the 1% annual chance floodplain, similar to the historic districts. The CFR will continue this framework, allowing the optional provisions to modify regulations applicable in all areas within any district that geographically overlaps with the 1% and the 0.2% annual chance floodplains, consistently with how the current rules apply. So ultimately, the CFR's modification to special district rules reinforce their goal to ensure the vibrancy of city streets and neighborhoods. The reason why these changes are necessary is because when special districts were developed before Sandy occurred, they did not generally consider resiliency needs. So the CFR would ultimately allow buildings in the floodplain have a consistent set of regulations for resiliency, ensuring that on one hand, resilient strategies aren't hindered by zoning rules, and on the other hand, that resilient buildings did not negatively impact the public realm. Next slide. So I'll dive a little bit more into the specifics because in addition to this kind of general comment, we also got 2 community boards with more specific comments. So Manhattan Community Board 4 recommended that the text include a language requiring special permit approval from the City Planning Commission for any new developments that utilize flood resilience measures within special districts. The main area of concern raised by Community Board 4 speaks to the Special West Chelsea District, which establishes a specific criteria on bulk and height in order to protect and promote the High Line. So in this case, it is important to highlight that, again, the 2013 flood text regulations already modifies the West Chelsea Special District regulations to ensure that all properties can achieve resiliency without bumping to zoning constraints. Since the raised concerns mostly relate to bulk and height regulations, we would like to dive a little bit further on what are the rules that apply to West Chelsea today and how they're being modified by the CFR. So first of all, the BFE levels, as you can see here in this map in West Chelsea, are really high, reaching from 4 to 6 feet of expected floodwaters in many instances, as shown within the Resilient Neighborhoods Report, West Chelsea. It is important, this is really important because the 2013 flood text modified height and floor area regulations post-Sandy in ways that are actually more flexible and extensive than what the CFR is proposing today. So next slide. I'll start with floor area exemptions. So the proposed text is actually reducing the amount of floor space that can be exempted in areas with moderate to higher flood levels, the provision known as the above grade cellar exemption. While this current rule allows an entire floor to be exempted, ZCFR is reducing that allowance to only the first 30 feet from the building street wall after receiving the feedback from communities that the cellar exemption was leading to buildings out of scale. So the wet flood proofing exemption is not widely applicable within the district since parking will likely not be built within ground floors and residential lobbies that are wet flood proofed would occupy a small percentage of the ground floor level. So I focus more on the dry flood proofing one. Next slide. Regarding height, the current regulations allow mixed-use buildings, commercial buildings, and community facilities with BFEs, base flood elevations higher than 4 feet to measure height from 12 feet above grade. This is known as the bump up rule by the technical community. So next slide. To illustrate that, you can see this building under development located along 11th Avenue. ZCFR with the reference plane would actually be reducing this allowed height from 12 to 10 feet, so 2 feet shorter than what is allowed today. In exchange for this bump up, developments needed to provide transparency and typically retail behind it, right at grade, to bolster the pedestrian experience. We can see this example is proposing retail right under the High Line. ZCFR will continue the spirit of these regulations by coupling reference plane allowances and allow elevation with mandatory streetscape requirements at the ground floor level. Next slide. And then this is another building along 22nd Street that utilized the current bump up provision and provided active uses at the street level with transparency as well. Next slide. But then there's another example in West Chelsea, actually illustrating the need for ZCFR proposed modifications to the current bump up and floor area provisions and how they apply. Since floor area for the retail wrap requirement was not exemptable in new buildings, this building actually opted to not use the bump up allowance, as any retail at grade would count against residential allotment. Not only was this to the detriment of the streetscape, it was also to the detriment of the building, as it could not future-proof important programmatic features well above the floodplain. So ZCFR's set of provisions would ultimately help support West Chelsea's goal to ensure a dynamic mixed-use neighborhood with an active streetscape, in addition to the mentioned height and floor area modifications through the expansion of the set of streetscape requirements to all buildings that utilize the height allowances, the floor area exemptions, and other proposed provisions. ZCFR will ensure that resilient buildings continue to contribute to their surroundings within this and other dynamic floodplain neighborhoods. Next slide. I also want to point out to another more specific comment that came from Bronx Community Board 8, which was concerned with how ZCFR would affect their special natural district requirements. At the public hearing, the Riverdale Nature Preservancy suggested that the project should not modify the SNAD district rules, except the allowance for height to be measured from the design floor elevation to allow buildings to meet Appendix G regulations. However, I would note that the applicability within SNAD is very limited, with only a few lots touching the 1% and the 0.2% interchange floodplains, allowing those few sites to proactively incorporate resiliency strategies. And because the ZCFR proposal modernizes special districts regulations to meet resiliency standards, and as we saw in the case of West Chelsea, often furthers their specific streetscape goals, we don't feel it's appropriate at this time or necessary to exempt special districts from ZCFR's applicability. And I'll definitely welcome any questions that you have. All right, so a few Manhattan boards, as well as the Borough Board and Borough President, they had recommendations to remove the height allowances and floor area exemptions in new development. The recommendation was to ultimately provide a different treatment for new and existing buildings. The main point that was raised is that new buildings already have to meet Appendix G regulations, and therefore there is no reason to give these projects access to what they described as zoning incentives. That said, it was recommended that heights should continue to be measured from grade, so base plane or curb level, depending on the district, and that no floor area exemptions should be offered to new buildings. Next slide. So I'll start by explaining why ZCFR is proposing to treat new and existing buildings the same way. The 2013 flood text did provide, in some instances, different treatment regarding how the regulations apply to new versus existing buildings. So for instance, today, only existing buildings could exempt spaces that are flood-proofed. However, the main reason for this is that the 2013 flood text was solely focusing on enabling buildings to meet minimum Appendix G standards, and the department had not fully analyzed or understood the complexity of applying flood regulations to New York City's diverse building typologies. Next slide. So when providing the same flexibility to new and existing buildings in the floodplain, ZCFR is allowing all buildings to meet Appendix G, but also exceed these standards if a property owner opts to include future sea level rise projections into the design. This means that building owners will be able to proactively locate living spaces and equipment to higher elevations without having to lose buildable space. Absent this, buildings would likely be constructed to just meet minimum code standards. Next slide. So the proposed CFR framework for height and floor area also handles concerns brought by communities regarding the streetscape, since the additional height provided by the reference plane, coupled with the floor area exemptions for flood-proof spaces, incentivize internal access to be located at grade and reduces the potential of blank walls or inactive spaces at the street level. In addition, by providing the same framework to new and existing structures, the proposed text would ensure more consistent and predictable outcomes. So let me give one example of this. Next slide. Today, with the current rules, each lot has a different maximum height since height depends on DFE levels, which change site by site. Architects, for instance, have pointed out to us that slight topographic changes along the same street mean that neighboring buildings can have several feet of height difference, allowing some to reduce flood insurance costs and be designed to be protected in the longer term, while others can't. This reference plane, on the other hand, would apply to all lots across all zoning districts, ensuring that each building can be designed with a flood-proof base that can withstand flood events, and all residential units will be placed starting at the second story, well above expected flood level in most cases. Treating new and existing buildings differently would end up encouraging property owners to do structural gymnastics to maintain their existing building status. Next slide. And regarding the proposal to remove all height allowances for new construction, including the allowance to measure height from the design floor elevation, we would like to note that the zoning resolution has a long history of accommodating floodplain standards required by FEMA into its regulations for new construction. This is since the city first joined the National Flood Insurance Program in 1983. The department back then responded to the request of communities that maximum heights should be measured from the base flood elevation as opposed to grade level to ensure that property owners wouldn't lose buildable space. The 2013 flood tax continued this framework by allowing height to be measured from the design flood elevation, and ZCFR will maintain this standard. It will really be a policy setback to reduce these allowances, which have been in place in the zoning resolution for more than 3 decades now. The same is true regarding floor area exemptions. The zoning resolution has also been exempting spaces below the flood level through modifications to the cellar definition that I mentioned earlier since the 80s. However, ZCFR is proposing to remove such exemption, as I explained, and instead only allow spaces that are flood-proofed to be exempted. Next slide. The reason for that, just to dive a little bit more, is because the cellar exemption ended up resulting in squished ground floors with low ceilings, and at the same time, sunken ground floors ended up also being encouraged, which are less resilient since those developing the floodplain would build the floor partly below the sidewalk level to get the floor area exemption. Ultimately, this floor area exemption resulted in buildings out of scale, as the floor area that gets exempted can actually be used for non-residential uses when dry flood proofed. ZCFR is therefore, as I mentioned, reducing such exemption for dry flood proof spaces to only be exempted for the first 30 feet. This limited exemption is still necessary to continue to encourage active uses to be kept at the street level, considering the high cost of such flood proofing method. Additionally, the proposal would exempt wet flood proof spaces from floor area calculations because Appendix G regulations restrict the use of such spaces to minor storage spaces, and then building access and parking, which are both already exempted today. I would also note that because of height and floor area allowances that already exist today to new development, removing these items fully would actually be out of scope. Next slide. Are there any questions at this time, I guess? And then I'll talk more about existing buildings. Thank you. So as with the recommendations for existing buildings, there is a recognition from Manhattan boards that they need a certain amount of relief to be able to be retrofitted. However, it was recommended that height should continue to be measured from the design floor elevation as opposed to the reference plane. Along commercial corridors for buildings that utilize the dry flood proofing floor area exemption, it was also recommended that the extra height should be capped to 1 additional story or 15 feet, whichever is lower. Regarding the recommendation to remove the reference plane provision for existing buildings, As mentioned, this proposed regulation is drawn from existing height allowances known as the bump up regulations. The current rules already allow for additional height. Today, heights can actually be bumped to 9, 10, or 12 feet, as I mentioned in those case studies, depending on the building type and zoning district. So after several years of outreach, we heard that the bump up is actually helpful in allowing property owners to incorporate sea level rise projections into the building's design, aside from also reducing low quality crawl spaces, which generate blank walls, which is something that the 2013 flood tax tried to address. So the proposal would ensure that all have access to the modified bump up rules proposed by ZCFR, the reference plane. Since the recommendation is also to remove the reference plane for existing buildings, it is particularly important to note that the reference plane would also enable greater flexibility for the relocation of floors from below the DFE to above the structure, since large buildings and those that are attached to other structures will not be able to simply physically be raised to the design floor elevation. Regarding the recommendation to cap additional height along commercial corridors, it is a little unclear if the recommendation was to restrict height even beyond the zoning envelope in instances when lots are actually underbuilt, or to actually give more flexibility along corridors to enable the relocation of stories. If the former, it would be contrary to zoning to lock existing buildings into their existing size and shape, and instead only enable one floor addition without really recognizing the underlying bulk regulations that were established for that area. This will be inconsistent with the CFR's goals of allowing already permitted densities in the floodplain. And then if the recommendation is meant to provide flexibility to buildings that exempt the dry flow-proof space, then it is similar to the proposed reference plane, which already allows up to 10 feet of additional height above the maximum permitted height, which we believe to be appropriate to address that concern. So for all these reasons presented in this section, we don't believe it's appropriate and necessary to modify the proposal to address these concerns. And then, yeah, if there are any questions.
Okay, please go ahead, Manuela.
Okay. Next slide, please. I'll go to the item regarding mechanical equipment. So Manhattan boards generally share the concern that mechanical equipment on open areas can consume the existing open space in dense Manhattan neighborhoods. The Borough board suggested that the MEP allowances should only be capped in low density areas. On the other hand, one board suggested that the MEP allowances could be available in higher density areas, but only where it's structurally necessary to place mechanical equipment within open areas. So to answer to all these concerns, ZCFR is proposing to keep the existing allowances for mechanical equipment to be placed safely above the flow level in open areas within higher density districts in the floodplain, which already applies to both new and existing buildings. ZCFR builds upon these regulations, proposing only a few modifications to this rule to enable greater flexibility to site these structures. This is because raising equipment is often the first step to improve a building's resilience, since it's more easily achieved than fully retrofitting a structure. Also, MEP within residential buildings cannot be placed below grade per Appendix G regulations, which I spoke a little bit at the review session last time. And while non-residential buildings could potentially place equipment below grade, that strategy is less reliable than if the equipment were to be placed above the expected flow elevations. Also, space within buildings may be constrained, and structures often cannot sustain additional loads from what we heard from the technical community. So given all these potential constraints, DCP feels that the proposed flexibility is warranted in relocating mechanical equipment in the flood zone, no matter the building type or district, to ensure that buildings sustain less damage and that residents can more quickly return to their homes post a coastal storm. Next slide. There was also another concern, more specific from one board in Manhattan regarding the mechanical buildings, which are being facilitated in campus housing. And they recommended that they should come to the community board for approval. ZCFR is enabling this strategy to be as a right after coordinating closely with HPD and NYCHA, who recommended that ZCFR should remove zoning impediments that currently restrict the ability of large campuses of raising mechanical equipment. This was brought up to DCP by the mentioned agencies who had years of experience in advancing their resiliency portfolio post-Sandy. Removing this allowance would continue to slow down such strategies from being implemented in the areas of the city where we have so many floodplain residents. That said, we believe that keeping these DCFR rules are necessary to advance resiliency on NYCHA and other residential campuses, so no changes are deemed necessary as well. Next slide, I'll talk about power systems. So this is also another brief comment regarding the types of equipment that can be placed on open areas on a citywide level. We received a comment from one Manhattan board who raised the concern with allowing diesel generators and their potential impact on air quality and noise on rail yards. DCP worked closely with other city agencies to design the proposed regulations for power systems to be considered permit obstruction on open areas. Ultimately, zoning focuses on establishing the maximum size of these pieces of equipment and their placement on the property in a way that does not pose conflicts with neighboring buildings, whereas other rules regulate safety, fuel types, and the maximum energy load that these pieces of equipment can generate in order to ensure that they are accessory to the primary use of the lot. So to go more specific on the diesel power generators concern, generators serving existing 1- and 2-family homes are already allowed as permit obstruction on open areas since Hurricane Sandy. And so far, we haven't seen concerns since their incorporation from what we heard. Also, because they are small, they don't affect air quality or noise. In addition, our understanding is that all installations will need to get DOB permits and comply with electrical code. Also, building code and DP regulations basically split the rules between small house-based generators and larger equipment. Bigger equipment does have to abide to DP standards for air quality. Noise code would apply to both the smaller and larger types of equipment. Also, please note that the proposed text, as you can see, requires equipment serving buildings other than 1- and 2-family homes, so the larger pieces of equipment, to be enclosed within a building or other structure, except for required ventilation. So for the reasons above, we also believe that no changes would be necessary. And welcome questions regarding the mechanical equipment power system items.
Just a quick question, it's really a clarification, and I believe I raised this at, I guess it was review session, but I know we talk about enclosures of the mechanical equipment, but could you just remind me about what, if any, planting requirements there may be for this equipment when it's, but something like this, for example, I mean, obviously there's a fence, it's within someone's property line, it's hard to tell, but let's assume that's happening. It's quite different than if it's something out in a public space or you are adjacent to another property where there isn't a fence, and it's a very different experience. So what if anything does this proposal do that mitigates the impact, the physical, visual impact of this equipment being, in a place that's visible and also accessible in a lot of ways?
Mm-hmm.
There's also there's sort of the attractive nuisance potential issue for children accessing, so just sort of it's all packaged, but I just wondered what comes out of this proposal that recognizes neighborhoods and public space and the visual of that and how people interact with it.
Right. No, yeah, that's a great question. So we do require the enclosure for the larger pieces of equipment, as I mentioned, for generators and cogeneration equipment. But then in general, with all types of equipment that can be raised on open areas, we're actually mandating that be screened by vegetation. So the way we crafted the zoning text, we require that either if you are placing equipment on front yards, or if you are, in a district that don't have a front yard requirement, but still you're kind of putting that equipment on the front portion of your property. So within any space between the street wall and the street line, if you're placing any equipment there, that has to be screened by vegetation. That's something, yeah, we added. And then for the larger pieces of equipment that I was mentioning that we're trying to advance in campus housing, So those can be really large buildings. As you may have seen, I think Red Hook Houses is a good example of a project that is implementing such strategy. For those, we are actually requiring them to comply with a plan of streetscape mitigation, which is also included in the text. And that could be through, vegetation and other forms of intervention, design intervention to not have that impact, that negative impact.
And ultimately, is that a buildings department enforcement issue, or is that who enforces that once? I mean, I guess I'm just thinking through the process. So if someone wants to do this and it becomes, I'm assuming through this proposal, sort of an as of right element, or do they need to register or get a permit to do this after the fact? Is this kind of equipment permitted even though they have an as of right location they could put it? So what happens to ensure that these important provisions are actually engaged and then enforced in a community?
Yeah, so they will follow the formal permitting process with the Department of Buildings. So when you're adding equipment on open areas like that, if it's an existing structure, you're probably going to be filing for an Alt 1 or probably an Alt 1 or Alt 3 type of permit, and DOB would then revise that permit and see what the regulations that they have to comply with, and this will be one of them. So you would cite those things in the ZD1 documents, and PW1 forms, they actually include a box for you to demonstrate if you are in the floodplain or not. So that's kind of the first step for DOB to know that they need to check 6400 regulations in the zoning resolution. And then, of course, the practitioners, they will be including all the referenced sections in the ZR that they are complying with. And then the vegetation requirement that I mentioned to you is actually embedded within the power system allowance for open areas. So it's very easy for them to see. It's a friendly, I would say, a friendly text.
Okay, Manuela, thank you. And that would be the same whether it's they're building a building to house this in some open space, or it would be a house almost in what looks a little bit like what this might be, an alley between two homes. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
same thing for the smaller or bigger types of equipment. I would say that the one that you can see here on the slide on the left, we took this photo when doing a site visit at Village East, from what I recall. I believe that this was still in the early stages, so they raised the equipment and they were actually going to proceed with the screening for that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Manuela. Thank you. Great presentations this afternoon for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have very quick 2 last items, if that's okay for me to try to finish them today.
Please.
All right, so next slide, please. We'll go to vulnerable populations. So the last zoning topic speaks to the proposed restriction to nursing homes within the 1% floodplain in additional areas where evacuation may be difficult. As mentioned, many conditions by Manhattan and Queens generally asked that we analyze if additional types of vulnerable populations beyond nursing homes should be considered when limiting development in the floodplain. So DCP believes that restricting nursing homes is an appropriate and vital first step to address vulnerable populations in the flood zone based on current regulatory practices. As we continue our resiliency work more broadly, we definitely welcome further insights into vulnerable populations, and we'll continue to gauge the appropriateness of land use against the safeguards available in the building code and other regulatory frameworks. Also, if there's any question about the nursing home item. So this last item that I have, next slide, slide 28. All right, so this last item speaks about green infrastructure. The Bronx Council for Environmental Quality provided a statement at the public hearing in opposition, stating that the project should incentivize green infrastructure and that sustainability and resiliency should work better together. CCFR's goal is really to enable buildings to better withstand flooding from large but infrequent coastal storms like Sandy. While we understand the benefits of green infrastructure to address inland flooding, the scale of green infrastructure in individual lots may not be effective in addressing coastal flooding.
In addition, green infrastructure is actually not prohibited in zoning. And so such strategies can still be implemented today by property owners that decide to do so without facing zoning constraints. It's also important to highlight here how other agencies have been working on inland flooding mitigation and green infrastructure programs. So the city, led by the Department of Environmental Protection, is investing billions of dollars in its sewer networks and doubling the size of its green infrastructure program by constructing 5,000 new street side rain gardens. DP is also administering the Green Infrastructure Grant Program to incentivize private property owners to retrofit their roofs with green roofs to manage stormwater runoff. The city, also led by the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, launched a study in 2019 to identify the New York City neighborhoods most vulnerable to flooding from extreme rain events and to suggest steps to promote against precipitation-based flooding. And then last, these types of regulations are not usually handled by the zoning resolution, as demonstrated by the proposed introduced bill number 962, which proposes to further regulate impermeable areas by amendments to Appendix A of the Building Code. So this concludes the content I brought to you today. And then, if there's any questions on this last item or any of the items I presented, let me know. And if there's anything else that the CPC would like to hear about regarding ZCFR on March 1st, please let us know.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you. Manuel, I just wanted to go back to the prior screen in which you mentioned nursing homes. Yeah, proposed rule would prohibit new nursing homes. The rest of the text is blocked. Could you just tell me what that says?
Oh yeah, let me see. Prohibit new nursing homes and restrict the enlargement of existing facilities within the 1% NHS floodplain in selected areas where vehicular access will likely become limited during a disaster. I think it's just how we organize the text, but it's not cropped. Is that clear enough?
Yeah, I seem to recall it was a nursing home. I assume it's still there in Red Hook that was in a floodplain zone. That may not be the only one, but that's the one I remember.
It didn't get approved at the city council.
Right. Okay. Right.
Yeah,
So that cannot expand in any fashion under this new rule.
If it's an existing nursing homes, they could be expanded. We are still allowing enlargements up to 15,000 square feet to occur to really allow for modest improvements, those including resiliency as well. So existing facilities.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, existing facilities. So the facilities that are existing are the red dots. We try to capture all of them, hopefully. But yeah, so those can still enlarge. New construction that would be prohibited in the high risk flood zone, and then the geography is within the orange outline.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the commission? Thank you, Manuela. That was quite a comprehensive explanation. Appreciate your taking seriously every one of the comments that we got from the community boards.
Thank you so much.
Okay, commissioners, wrapping up our post-hearing follow-ups. We have Resilient Neighborhoods, Garrettson Beach, Cheapshead Bay Resiliency Text Amendment, Resilient Neighborhoods, Old Howard Beach, and 50-25 Barnett Avenue.
And it looks as if, I believe, Edwin, that is the last item that we have for this review session.
That's correct, Chair Lago. We've concluded today's review session agenda.
Okay, and I look forward to seeing the commissioners again tomorrow for quite a series of public hearings that we have scheduled. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you.
Carol.
Bye.